Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to our FEA Conference Center on such a beautiful day. We're really thrilled that you decided to spend time with us to talk about creating a vision for the alignment of quality early childhood education, something that's near and dear to all of our hearts. So we hope we have excellent conversation today. I hope that you listen well, that you challenge, that you ask lots of questions, and at the end, we'll have some time at our tables to synthesize everything, so hopefully you'll give us some very good advice on next steps. I'd like you to tweet, if you would. It's all over the paperwork. So it's hashtag NJECE leaders, and then please add NJPSA and Nicholson for New Jersey. And I want you to know when we're all finished, we will have a very nice luncheon, so please plan to stay for that. We have had a few changes in our program. John Mooney, who was going to be our moderator, unfortunately has been hospitalized unexpectedly. And we have one of our panelists, Dr. Salvatore from Long Branch, needing medical assistance today as well. So I'm glad the rest of us made it. So, thank you once again, and I would like to kick this off by asking Dr. Arturo Brito, our funder from the Nikolas Foundation, to please give us welcome regards.
Good morning, everyone. So pleased to be here and be representing the Nikolas Foundation. We are so happy to sponsor this and this work. For those of you who don't know much about the Nikolas Foundation, we are a New Jersey-focused foundation, and our mission is to improve the health and well-being of vulnerable populations throughout the state of New Jersey. And I couldn't think of a better way to meet that mission than to sponsor programs that are focused on our most vulnerable residents, our youngest children in the state. We have two priority areas at the Nikolas Foundation: health and early childhood. And if you look at all the data, all the science about what determines healthy lives, it's the number one is not healthcare access, it's not even public health or traditional public health, it is quality education. Quality education is the number one determinant of lifelong health and well-being. And when we think about early childhood education, that's the best way to start off with that lifelong health trajectory. So we are so proud to be partners in this, and proud to be partners with the Foundation for Educational Administration, as well as with the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association on the preschool to grade 3 Early Childhood Transforming Leadership Institute. There's some great work being done around the state, and we're also very fortunate that we're at a time when the current administration in New Jersey, under Governor Phil Murphy, has been so committed to early childhood education. October 1st is around the corner, and on October 1st, at the last count, I think there'll be 28 more state-sponsored pre-K programs. That means more than 1,400 children will be benefiting from state-sponsored pre-K programs. This brings a total, I think, over 140 around the states, around the state of New Jersey, benefiting from this program. The state's budget this year includes $20 million more for pre-K, full-day pre-K education. So we're at a time when working together, we can really take advantage of the current administration's commitment and understanding of the importance of early childhood education. There's so many people to thank. It's always a risk to, point anybody out. So I'm just going to do it globally. I know that we have some legislators here today. We have people from the educational field. We have people from other not-for-profits. So I just want to thank everybody collectively And from the Nikolas Foundation, I particularly want to point out our senior program officer, who will be on the panel later, Shannon Ayers, who's really the brains behind all this. I have nothing to do. I just come up here and get to do the easy part, make some welcoming remarks. But she's really been committed to this. One thing that brings us together, I am a pediatrician by background. She is a early childhood or pre-K to 3 educator by background. And it's not a coincidence that we work really well together, because we understand that early childhood period and how important it is to cognitive development, emotional development, social development, and this is why this works so well at the foundation. And we're so fortunate to have her as a leader at the foundation, working with all of you. So thank you very much, and we look forward to the day and hearing all of you and hearing the panels. Quite a lineup today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Pat Wright, the Executive Director of New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association, and I just want to welcome all of you here this morning. We thank you so much for being here, for being part of this critical conversation. We know, and we have been working with the Nikolas Foundation to really strengthen leadership in the area of pre-K through 3, along that continuum. We know that success in pre-K through 3rd grade years is critical to a student continuing to be successful, both academically, social, emotional, and with their social, emotional learning, et cetera. So this has been such a wonderful initiative for us. We want to thank the Nikolas Foundation for all of their support, and I would be remiss if I didn't personally thank Mary Reese, who is our Director of Special Projects over at FEA, who has been leading the pilot with Nikolas around this critical topic. And personally for me, I just watched my 3-year-old grandson enter preschool. And so I see the lights in his eyes and his eagerness to learn, and we need to ensure that that continues throughout his academic career and through the academic career of all the students in New Jersey. So welcome to NJPSA, and please enjoy your day.
Thank you, Arturo and Pat, for that welcome. We thought it would be best to start this day off by framing the discussion around creating the vision. And immediately I thought of our next presenter, who is a member of our steering committee. She is a professor of early childhood education and co-director of Early Childhood Leadership Institute at Rowan University. Please welcome Dr. Zeynep Erkan.
Trying to see if this works. Can everyone hear me? I don't want to be like this, but as I'm talking. Okay, that's great. Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm so happy to be here. I think every one of us are so excited today because we get to think about this framework in a beautiful start of the year. All together, we have some important great leaders here that some of you I really personally know and love, so it's always good to be in your company. I have been an early childhood professor for 10 years now. I just got promoted to full professor at Rowan University. I was directing the early childhood program for a while. I worked in Indiana and Ohio previously, so I have had an opportunity to have a national outlook of RP3 alignment issues a little bit. My research experience really align with school practices. My heart is, I always say this, my heart is with P through 2nd grade continuum for another research-based reason. I'm not so much into 3rd grade because of how we get into the testing and all of these mandatory pieces. However, my research lays in school practice. I look into rigorous and developmentally appropriate instructional and curricular approaches. In my research, I have worked with teachers collaboratively, we work together to create project-based units, STEM. I do STEM integration. I also collaborate with computer scientists and engineers to embed 3D technologies, which is pretty cool. We create modules and implement them, and I was able to do some experimental work as well, and how before and after it really makes a difference when you're providing the right resources to our young children, but those tools that you would not necessarily do based on what our current standards dictate, but those tools may be reserved for older children too. So I really believe in challenging and rigorous curricular approaches for young children, and that they can take it in. And I always work with low-income and highly diverse school communities, because I believe in the children's capacities, and they're wonderful, they're amazing, amazingly smart and so capable. So currently I'm working on a book project nurturing young children in diverse P through third grade classrooms. And you could tell that I'm into intellectual development piece a little bit, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that in terms of our framework. I'm also interested in leadership and professional development. I'm co-director of Early Childhood Learning Institute that we have that is funded by multiple organizations. We have done work with Nikolas Foundation, our partners, Department of Human Services, Division of Family Development. I have friends here in DCF and Department of Education. We're also currently providing professional development. For all of these groups, we're working with early childhood leaders who are working with adults, who are working with practitioners to support them in their daily work. My research with communities and families, really is in the area of experiences and strengths of culturally diverse children and families. I work with immigrants and refugees and their education. Currently, I'm doing a research study with my partners at Rowan, looking into Camden City and Camden's young immigrant families with children ages birth to 5, and eco-mapping the supports and systems around them. And we have been creating parent surveys and going to every immigrant community, and really hoping that that would support the efforts of Promise Neighborhood Project in Camden and other pieces. All right, so enough about me. So if we go back to this Stephen King's quote I love, he says, no, it's not a very good story. Its author was too busy listening to other voices to listen as close as he should have to the one coming from inside. So as I was preparing for this, I have seen multiple models of, and over the years too, multiple models of P through third grade alignment. Honestly, if we have to be frank, we have to just say that nationally, we don't have a lot of perfect models. This is an area that we are struggling nationally. So in New Jersey, we don't have anything to fear for. We don't have anything to be feeling bad about, our progress, which we have a lot. We have a lot of great progress. So I think that our starting point should be, we should not compare ourselves to another state, any other setting. It should be from within. So that's my big, point for the day. But then the question is for us, what should P3 alignment look like for New Jersey, for us? Anyway, what do we expect? What do we like? I hope that today's conversation will help with that, that answering that a lot. But to start with, I wanted to frame this in terms of the stakeholders that we serve. And I believe our district leaders and policymakers are also stakeholders, because we all said we have kids, we have grandchildren in schools, we have kids in children. This is such an important piece that everybody is invested and interested in. So I'm looking at the actors here, I'm looking at who is affected by this. But one actor that is affected the most, that has the least voice, who is that? the child, right? So we have to, I'm starting with the child with this conversation, and then we will go to families and teachers and school leaders next, and then families and communities, and then last, I'm going to make some policy recommendation based on what we have seen happening nationally and what are some good practices. I have a lot of resources. Actually, some of them are included in a PowerPoint handout that I'm distributing today, so you have that in the last page. Primary resources that I love, so please go and read those nationally, but also I have tons of other resources and links. If you're interested, shoot me an email. My email is ercan, oh, it doesn't show, but ercan@rowan.edu, but it's on your handout too. All right, so I see the child at the core of the P3 system, right, like no-brainer. But I want to start with what kinds of child outcomes we would like to see by grade 3, because that conversation is critical to me because of the things that I'm going to tell about our state and national too. I feel like for this conversation to happen, we need to look at 3 things. Learning standards for children. So do we have sound learning standards that we know by grade 3, we covered the child, and that we're holding ourselves accountable as a system? Do we have a longitudinal data system? Because that's something that is popping up right now nationally, that a lot of states are trying to do that. That do we track the children actually from P through 3rd grade? And I feel almost like I'm excluding birth to 5 from this conversation, or birth to 3, but I'm not. But it's just for the sake of the argument, right? So when states actually achieve this, have a longitudinal data system from P through 3rd grade, what is the next step, you think? They go immediately to birth to 5 and birth to 3 and tie that piece too. So in a sense, our ultimate goal is achieving a birth to 8 system. But for the sake of this conversation, right, like I'm gonna think about that, but definitely we don't want to lose that focus of birth to 3, and I'm gonna address that. And then the 3rd piece is assessments and accountability. I'm gonna point some of the good work that already happened in New Jersey. Some of you are in the room are actually, actors of it. But when I see that, I think we have a little bit way to go in terms of implementation. And do we assess those good things, or do we assess, are we accountable to achieve that purpose is one thing. So I want to start with effective learning environments for young children, because as we know, if you have not had early childhood education training as a practitioner, there are some different ways that young children actually learn that might pose some kind of challenges for educators. Sometimes we think that it is actually easier to teach. If you taught high school and middle school, it might be easier to teach younger children because you have the content knowledge, but I always argue that it's the opposite. If you know how to teach infants and toddlers and preschoolers and kindergartners, it's actually easier to teach older children. Because even right now, even for adult learning, if you look at business literature, a lot of adult learning literature now talks about play-based learning for adults. So it's really how our brain functions. When you look at learning sciences, children really need rigorous and advanced knowledge. If they have limited vocabulary, if they have limited concepts, they get bored and they do not use their potential. So the rigorous knowledge, when I talk about play-based, developmental appropriate, project-based methodologies, I'm not talking about rigorous, because there is this divide in our field that we have to deal with also, that does that conflict, right? Does being rigorous conflict with early childhood pedagogies? I argue it's not. However, you need to also know that research tells us something that's interesting with research, and that actually this finding leads some states to make bad decisions. The second point that I'm going to make is most academic gains, meaning if a child knows multiplication or if a child knows certain vocabulary, some of those academic gains in high-quality pre-K programs wane over the years. So you almost feel like you're losing, but you actually are not losing, because those are not the things that children should keep. In my 5th grade education, I was able to draw a complete blood circulation system by my memory because I was taught to memorize it. So I memorized the whole blood circulation, the heart, and all the veins and everything, and then I forgot it. Right? Like I don't remember a thing about it. However, the skills that I learned that are adult skills, that are skills that we need in business world, in work skills, actually sustains. So that's what research tells us. So if we're just shooting for academic gains for a pre-K program, for quality, or for our P3 alignment, then we may make some bad decisions because we will think that, well, if that program does not lead into this higher skill about this particular, not even skill, but knowledge. Say, if children do not know this, or they forget this, then it's not high quality because a lot of our assessments are just looking at the content knowledge. So, but however, if you look at the high quality early childhood programs, we see that there is significant lifelong skills that children gain out of this, lower incarceration rates, Paris study, Abessarian study, Chicago child parent study, although a lot of the longitudinal studies that we have, there's a clear evidence that everybody accepts that the children who go through these high quality preschool programs have better physical and mental health, better social cognitive skills. So what happens in New Jersey? Abbott program, as you know, NEAR has been doing a lot of those evaluation studies of our Abbott programs. And same issue happens. Academic gains, not so marginally, significantly sustaining. However, the other social, emotional, cognitive skills are persisting. So that's what I think we should be considering. Because I'm really interested in intellectual engagement, intellectual development, this is sort of like my take on it. When we think about young children, by the end of 3rd grade, a lot of the foundational work for you to raise next generation's intelligence is already happened because you're really providing those intense skills to children. Examples, autonomy and self-regulation. So before you actually have children, you don't have to even line the children up in the hallway, and you don't have to give them a command every 1 minute. I was just in a field yesterday. I'm constantly in the classrooms, and sometimes we struggle because we feel like we have to command children in every minute. Okay, stand up, be quiet. But when children gain autonomy, they actually do it by themselves. So they don't need our directions a lot, right? So in-depth concepts, higher order thinking, really scrutinizing an idea, really criticizing, really thinking about multiple perspectives, multiple options, really poking children's curiosity a lot. So these kind of things are intellectual skills. Some researchers call them approaches to learning, and some of them are in our pre-K standards in New Jersey, which is fantastic. So we have that creativity, communication, these kind of things. So I think a leadership opportunity for New Jersey would be we need to resist the idea that content knowledge learning should be our sole outcome when we figure out quality in P3 alignment. Children's social, emotional, cognitive, intellectual, physical development, and health should be integrated into a 5-year P3 continuum. That would be sort of like our ideal world to start with. Learning standards, I think, could be maybe revised because current content standards from K through 3rd grade are only looking at the content knowledge. I think this is where some of the fragmented pieces happen. In other states too, it's the same thing. So this is a national struggle. So in pre-K, we measure a lot of these social, emotional, cognitive, and physical outcomes in children, and we're hoping that work sustains. However, because our teachers are policy, our teachers are told you're measuring math and literacy and ELA skills. Our teachers have no choice but focus on those, right? Like as a primary source. Obviously, our teachers are doing a fantastic job. You know, really working with children in all of these skills in the background, but we have no way of supporting those who do a very well job or bringing those up who do a fantastic job with those developmental outcomes and making them leaders and helping them teach others or like help others. So we're not actually using their potential. And they're doing a wonderful job still without being measured or being evaluated with that, right? So it's happening though. And then I think then it brings us to this point of assessment. Statewide and district level assessment should target all developmental ideas and high-level thinking skills. And then later, right, like at the last piece, accountability should be established and resources are provided to districts to enable that so that we're really tracking this whole child. And if you look at current research in psychology, psychology is moving into an integrated direction too. Not only they're looking at the whole child, they're looking at whole adult now, and they're looking at all these pieces for a successful individual. Even some new psychological research puts spirituality in it. Like there's so many interesting ways that now we're told how to be a good human being or how to be a complete person. Here's what I'm talking about. When you look at our preschool standards, we have these pieces, and then and K3 learning standards are the same. So when you look at the P3 continuum, we have a lot of these content level standards. Only pre-K standards have social emotional development and approaches to learning, which I told you that were related to intellectual piece, engagement piece, and then social emotional development. K through third grade standards, we don't have that. But when you look at our teaching standards, which I absolutely love, it's basically really integrated with in-task standards, our teacher standards. So when you look at our teacher standards, we have a broad, a very comprehensive set of standards for teachers, which is fantastic. So you look at a lot of pieces like learner development, differences, learning environments, professional learning, leadership and collaboration. So an alignment with the standards of what do we expect teachers to do and what do we expect children to come out of this P through 3 system is really important. If you look at teacher standards, the only thing that are related to content, solely content, are content knowledge, assessment, and planning for instruction. But all others are more comprehensive. So I absolutely love this, and I think this could be a starting point for our piece. Also, if you look at the 21st century skills, you look at that, this is really comprehensive too. If we're targeting those next generation of adults with work skills and highly effective citizens that will contribute to our society, you're looking into a lot of those intellectual skills that I mentioned about. So if we go back to longitudinal and linked data systems, looking at what is best practice, it might be great to track children's growth over a 5-year span if we have that system. And we actually have that system in childcare now. We have a New Jersey EASL system that DFD is actually like overseeing for young children. So it might be a start of that. We have also, we have to think about how do we inform transitions and teaching teams to receive that information. So how does it get trickled down to different grades or next grades? And then this data system, if we're talking about DOE, it should be linked to other systems that DCF, DHS, and DOH might have, so that we have a complete picture of the child. So we're having state organizations like working together for this too. So in terms of, this was the child part, right? We talked about child outcomes. So if we move to the teacher piece, our question should be what kind of instructional practices we would like to see by grade 3. And the pieces with that is what kind of professional knowledge we're providing our teachers. And we have to talk about our certification levels with that in New Jersey. And then we have to think about horizontal and vertical alignment of professional practice. We'll talk about that. And assessment and accountability for New Jersey teaching standards. Again, because teaching standards, like I said, I think it's marvelous. It's wonderful that we have that. So who is teaching New Jersey's young children? When you think about that, in an ideal world, because I'm doing the framework, right? Like I have all the freedom to envision and dream, and then you guys can be like, we're not gonna get that, whatever. But This is what I would love to see in an ideal world. Birth to 3 would have an infant and toddler teaching certificate. P to 3 would have a standard early childhood teaching certificate. 4 to 8 would be an upper elementary and middle school. 9 to 12 secondary education. But I know there are multiple models and it's so hard to accomplish. But what do we have right now in New Jersey? There's actually a group that is working on an infant and toddler teaching certificate. So if you're interested, Suzanne Burnett in the Head Start Collaborative Office is leading that team. And it's really exciting that we have that opportunity now. And that will be offered through Department of Education. We also have the P3 Standard Early Childhood Teaching Certificate, and then we have the K through 6 elementary. So I'm a teacher educator at Rowan University, and I know our curriculum very well in elementary curriculum and early childhood curriculum. So elementary curriculum has to focus on a lot of content knowledge because of what? Because of the testing, right? Like they have to have that. There is no excuse. So in a limited teacher ed space, that does not leave much of the space for early childhood certificate unless you integrate it in some manner. When I worked in Indiana, we had an sort of like an added-on integrated thing for elementary teachers, so they could have our early childhood certificate much easier. In New Jersey, we have this added 24 credit hour requirement, which is, I think, fantastic. It's a lot of good early childhood knowledge for new teachers. But if a teacher has a K through 6 elementary certificate, they're potentially teaching in a kindergarten classroom with young children, maybe not being a strong expert in early childhood. So how do we remedy that issue? I know that my friends in ACNJ, years ago, ACNJ has done like a survey. I was in my first year at Rowan to talk about what is the issue with the certification level. Like, can we just separate them, or can we not have overlap so it makes it easier? But then the challenge was from school leaders and district leaders' perspective that they lose their ability to be flexible, to assign teachers to different classrooms. So if that's a real concern, if that's not going to happen, maybe another thing that we need to think about is additional professional training to either obtain early childhood certificate, so that all kindergarten, first grade, and second grade teachers have then an early childhood certificate as well. And if this is too much, like if it is not doable, maybe another opportunity is an early childhood specialist credential, or some little add-on that we make sure that all of our teachers are consistently trained if they're teaching anywhere from P through third grade. And then I think another thing that we need to ensure from a school district perspective is that, is there a long-term commitment to teach in that level, right? So if that person is going to shift and get all that education, are they going to be sustained in that sort of like realm for a while? Especially the issue comes with our wonderful pre-K expansion. We need a lot of teachers, especially at the P level now. And again, the assessment and accountability for teaching standard piece is how are we measuring these pieces that are not read in teaching standards, right? Like how are we ensuring that those are happening? In terms of implementation of instructional practices, that brings us to the issue of quality, right? Like how are we teaching in a high, efficient, effective manner that has the high quality? I would suggest that like lessening the emphasis on content, just solely on content knowledge. I'm a huge proponent of content knowledge and very rigorous too, but it is delivered in a different methodology. So if you look at the Perry Preschool, Chicago Parent-Child Study, Abbott studies, all of these longitudinal studies, again, they tell us that just focus on content knowledge may not be a great strategy because they wane over the years, and you feel like you invested in a system with no return although you have a lot of return, but we're just not measuring that, right? Like, and we're not valuing in a sense, because if you're not measuring this, how would you expect? And believe me, this is a national conversation too. I have had that conversation happening in American Educational Research Association conference. 15,000 people go there, is the highest, very important conference. And also Society for Child Development session. They had a combined session. They talked about this very issue. How would you expect our teachers to focus on if we're not measuring that? So I suggest focusing on long-term impacts on adult life and adult developmental outcomes. And then the accountability. I see Shannon Riley Ayers and Sharon Ryan actually wrote a 1st through 3rd grade implementation guide, and it's still on our New Jersey website. So it kind of like gives a lot of good examples about how could you do early childhood in these levels. But again, like, we don't see that implementation guide or those pieces in practice, again, going to that previous issue, right? And so I would suggest assessment mandates to measure broader child outcomes as a result. When it comes to horizontal and vertical alignment of professional practice, in the literature, when we see that best practices always have a horizontal alignment, so grade level team planning is important, so teachers should not be siloed, and vertical alignment too. If we're not giving opportunities to teachers, if we are really physically and also teamwork, collaboration-wise, separating them by grade level. So preschool teachers will not have an opportunity to talk to a 3rd grade teacher because in the past school settings that I worked at and I was able to support and mentor, that conversation, when that conversation happened, it was an aha moment for a kindergarten teacher. The things that I'm teaching, maybe I need to add this because my 1st grade colleague actually needs that to happen in the beginning of the year, right? Like, so that conversation is really important. I would throw another thing here, it might seem radical to you, but there's a lot of good models internationally that talks about continuity of care. So if continuity of care is a concept in infant and toddler world most of the time, it means a caregiver takes the child as an infant and walks with them till they're 3. So there's continuity of care, if possible. At least one caregiver within the team. We want to have a stable relationship with the child because of what we know from neuroscience and early childhood development, that significant relationship with one adult is so critical. And that adult sees many children more than their parents. So that's a very important concept for us developmentally. How do you translate this into pre through 3rd grade settings? There's a lot of models internationally, not in the US, but that a teacher takes the child from kindergarten and takes them through 5th grade. There's a lot of models all around the world that does that, but that's a radical idea, I know. But I have the freedom to dream, right? But can we at least think about pre-K to K continuity of care? Can we at least think about 1st grade to 2nd grade continuity of care? Is that possible within the realm of school settings? Because it's so important developmentally that we lose a lot of instructional time, and there are research studies about this. We lose a lot of 1 month to 2 months of instructional time is lost just because the new teacher does not know anything about the kids from last year and they don't have any relationship. As you know, students don't respond to teacher if they don't have a relationship established. So that takes a couple months worth of, it's wasting our time in a way, but there are good sides of that too, like what if you don't get along with a teacher? And so there's different ways that the research approaches that. So I'm thinking about also investing in children and families. Families really did not want to change their caregiving places. If you look at Chicago Child Parent Centers study, there's a study, but there's a model as well. Parents think that, well, research nowadays thinks that this is the best model for US because it's still going on. In this model, parents and children start in a preschool setting and they continue. 1st grade and 2nd grade classrooms are added to the center. So they actually are in the same world, receiving the same social support. Parents don't have to leave, which also helps with parent engagement piece. So then it brings us to this parent and family and community engagement, which we again sorely need, and we have less in K through third grade continuum. We have a lot in pre-K because of how it's designed, but how do we do that alignment, right? That's an important piece too. So when pre-K programs establish strong relationships and transitions break up those relationships, what happens, right? There's a lot of important pieces that we lose, not knowing how to provide social services to parents. When you look at teacher education, what we are raising for Department of Education is quite different than how a caregiver is working with Department of Children and Families and Department of Human Services, because child care world is more comprehensive. Department of Education is, again, like we're so solely focused on content knowledge, and I'm not criticizing this. I am living in this world too. I'm raising my teacher candidates to do just that because there's just too much to do. So how do we make sure that it's a little bit connected and a little bit broader? But an early childhood framework for us provides continuity of services and supports as needed. So I want to imagine schools as centers, hubs for social organizations and support. And in Camden, we actually have some elementary schools who does just that. So there is Boys and Girls Club in the very physical environment in the school. So Camden District does a really good job of integrating those pieces a lot of times. So, last point, 2 more minutes, maybe 3 more minutes. District leaders and policymakers, this is where we have, right? Like we have this population is a stakeholder, has a lot of power, but not necessarily being impacted as a teacher who he lives day to day, and the children who are impacted the most. I want us to think a unique New Jersey early childhood framework and not the P33 alignment in the traditional sense. So one of the pieces that pops up because of what we are all observing, and this is really a systematic piece. It's not personal in any way or related to personnel, but there are policy barriers in implementing mixed delivery in pre-K expansion that we all hear, right? So hopefully trying to eliminate that. Mandating the utilization of childcare, nonprofit, and social supports might be important in an integrated system. So we see that a lot of school districts and teachers in particular as individuals may not be aware of a social organization right next door that could actually provide codes to all children. But that they just don't know each other. They just don't talk with each other. So an integrated system will bring all these resources to schools, if not physically, definitely with an aligned community system. There's a lot of models nationally where state departments actually pool these organizations together or delegate the responsibility to community. So communities bring their resources from businesses, from private funders to establish just that. I want us to mandate Grow New Jersey Kids, our new state quality rating and improvement system for all pre-K through third grade continuum, because it is really looking at quality learning environments, and that's just another way to integrate our systems together, right? Currently, it's not mandatory for anyone, because we're just starting, but I would like to see that happen in the future. And then also, again, like going back to the integration idea, early childhood systems that integrate our state departments at pre-T level, P3 level. It's harder to do it in middle school and high school, but at least we know that school age care that Department of Education supports goes till age 10. So we have a good actual reasoning and foundation to think P through 3 for that integration. And then again, supporting communities, and this is not something that states or policymakers can do alone, right? Like we have to be coming together just like this. Communities, school districts, private funders, businesses, regional and county operations should come together and build sustainable systems and child family supports. One of the bad things that happens with P3 alignment pieces is that a lot of those things happen through grants like Race to Top Quality, Race to quality grants or other past grants that actually ran out of money, and you have this wonderful system just crumbling in front of your eyes, and everybody invested in it, but because the funding is not sustainable. So we cannot expect government to fund every piece of it, nor a private foundation. So we have to think small and local and community-wise. And I think differentiating funds and supports to diversity is important. Another best practice in research is that when governments are able to diversify funding district by district, it makes a lot of difference to make sure that it reaches the best place. So in terms of my last piece is how do we fare compared to national efforts? So we're all wondering, are we doing bad? How are we doing? So I think, like I said in the beginning, we don't have anything to feel bad about. We have a great system. We have a great foundation. Many states and districts struggle with just essentials that we already have, such as teacher degrees. So they don't even have mandate in a lot of states. They don't even mandate bachelor's degree when you're teaching pre-K. It's just considered as part of childcare world. So I think this is eventually where we are moving nationally. If you look at Head Start and what's happening with Head Start and their mandate and timeline for teachers to have a bachelor's degree, you'll see that that's happening everywhere. Quality in pre-K programs, we have a wonderful tradition in New Jersey. We already have it. We already have great examples in different districts. And funding pre-K programs, we have a wonderful government right now who's very supportive, so I think we have some momentum there. But many states struggle with these and being able to fund pre-K programs. Current highlights for P-3 efforts are worth looking at if you have a chance to look at Boston Public Schools. Minnesota as a state is now getting into a good, strong P3 alignment. Pennsylvania is doing fine. Oregon is doing fine. Denver, Colorado has a really good initiative going on. Some good examples that already have happened. Montgomery School District in Maryland is pretty famous. Why is it famous? Because they are low income, highly diverse, so it's not like your suburban schools where you can make it happen, right? But they make it happen, and it's a very nice sustained system, so please check them out. Union City, Red Bank Borough in New Jersey, those are really good examples that I found. So we have some really good examples from our state. Oahu, Hawaii also was mentioned a lot. And I know there's many others, so I'm not disadvantaging anyone, hopefully, but just some examples, right? So New Jersey has birth to 3 learning standards, which is fantastic. I think Council for Young Children did that work a couple years ago with their subcommittees, fantastic work. A strong QRIS, because we're learning from what other states are doing. Grow New Jersey Kids. We have the Abbott model tradition. We have support for pre-K funding, and opportunity to integrate pre-K to districts through expansion funds. So basically what we're doing right now, right? Public support for education quality and a committed citizenry for positive change. So we're all really active. I love the dynamism that I see here in our citizens and in public in general. So, going back to the framework, I hope this initial idea informs our conversation a little bit today. I hope that you were able to grasp something new. I know we have some experts here, so I don't know how much of it was new to some of you. But thank you for joining me in envisioning a P3 system.
Thank you, Zeynep, for such an amazingly comprehensive view of alignment, also for challenging us to think out of the box. And I wanted to bring your attention to the sheet that's in your folder, which asks you to talk about the positive pathways, the obstacles, and supports. And while you're listening to people present today, jot down your own notes, if you would, about these, and also consider any policy changes that you feel would be appropriate to recommend. And Then, at the end, the last half hour, we will be talking in our tables about our thoughts and put together a composite one for all of us. So, we are going to transition right now to our first panel. I'm happy to report that even though John is not with us today, Dr. Vincent Costanza stepped up and agreed to be our moderator. And as you know, he is a longtime friend of this work, and we're really very happy that he's going to be moderating the next two panels. So welcome, Vincent, and would the first panelist group please come up?
So in the interest of time here, we'll get started. We're going to I have the pleasure of moderating two panels, one to give a state and national perspective, another with a little bit more of a local perspective. Here's how this is going to work. We're going to have this panel going for approximately an hour. Each of the participants will have, I shouldn't say each of the participants, each question will have about several minutes or so of a response. Please be vigorously writing down all the questions that you have. I will make sure that I leave enough time at the end to hear perhaps not all of your questions, but at least some of them. And for me, I just wanted to start off with several thank yous. Certainly thank you to Arturo for funding this great work that is happening with the support of the Nikolas Foundation, Pat Wright through the work of Foundation for Educational Administration, Mary Reese, although she's not here at the moment, for the invitation. I feel like I got my start in this room in some ways. My administrative certifications came through FEA and NJPSA, and having certifications as a principal and superintendent, learned a lot about and also having an early childhood background, about some of the policy changes that perhaps we need to be thinking about for some of our district leaders. I'm currently the Chief Academic Officer of Teaching Strategies. For the last 2 years, I've been doing that, traveling the country, internationally, learning about the intersection of some of these early childhood policies. It's great to see some old friends who said to me, "Oh, my goodness, you haven't been in New Jersey in a while. It's good to see you in New Jersey. You kind of sound like my wife a little bit." She says some of the same things at times. Previous to joining Teaching Strategies in my travels for the last 2 years, I was the Executive Director for Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge and co-administrator for the Division of Early Childhood Education, which had oversight of birth to third grade policies for the Department of Education. What struck me about Zeynep's presentation was really the intersection of how the issues that we're talking about are not just education issues, they're not just health issues, it's not something that Division of Child Development or Children and Families could address, but it really needs to have all of us together working on this. We do a lot of work talking about whole child development, but it's really about whole child, whole families, whole communities, and you certainly heard that through Zeynep's work. And what's part of what makes this panel this morning so important. I'm not going to give a bio on everybody. We could spend the whole time just giving bios on each individual, but just to point out that we have Assemblywomen, policy councils, deputy assistant commissioners, senior program officers. All of these folks are needed to do the work that we need to be building an aligned early care and education system that works for all of the children and families that we are in the care of. So right off to the first question, again, we're going to have several minutes to respond to each of these, and we'll start off in an orderly fashion. As a former kindergarten teacher, I kind of like the orderly process of things, and we'll start it like this and go from there. And we'll start with the Assemblywoman JC and go down. And for each of the panelists, if you could give a brief bio. And what I'm particularly interested in is why you're interested in the early learning field. Why does this work appeal to you? Assemblywoman.
Good morning. Is it on? Good morning. I apologize for being a little late. Traffic. Always the issue, right? So my interest comes from the fact that I come from a large family, and I have 10 siblings, and we depended on the public schools to educate all of us. Education was paramount to my parents, and they were both teachers, actually. And we have a lot of teachers in the family. We moved around the country, from Boston to Washington to Los Angeles and St. Paul, Minnesota. And we attended public schools in all of those places. And my mother was always looking for opportunities for us. And in fact, my twin brothers, who are 11 years younger than me, were in one of the first Head Start programs in Los Angeles. I had another younger brother who had Down syndrome. And my mother and father said, no, we're not going to institutionalize him. And somehow she managed to find a program for him when he was 3. And, you know, I could talk about that forever, but I won't. But that really, when I think about it, that's the basis for my interest. I understand that, you know, all children benefit from a rich experience early on. And also in our family, we didn't have a lot of stuff, but we had a lot of books. And reading was always part of my experience. And now I have grandchildren. I have 3 children. I have grandchildren. They're all different, but you know, we're carrying on the same kind of practice with them, looking for good programs for them to go to, free programs like at the library, nursery school, play groups, this kind of thing. Don't turn on the television. All the things I realized that was true of my upbringing, we're continuing with our children. We continued with our children and now with our grandchildren. And I know that it makes a difference because when I am with children who don't have that experience, and we have, unfortunately, a number of kids like that in our family because we have a very large family, my husband's, they don't know how to handle a book. They don't gravitate to puzzles and things like that. And so I know that they're not going to, unless we can break that cycle, they're not going to reach their full potential. So I'll leave it there, but you know, play is a lot more than play. And parents need to understand that. And so educating parents and helping them understand the importance of play and the importance of interaction, the importance of stories and music, all of these things are part of why I think this is so important and why we've been fighting for, you know, universal quality pre-K for all kids. Thanks.
Thank you. Certainly lots of ideas that we'll all have an opportunity to play with for the rest of the morning. Thank you. Please.
Good morning. My name is Assemblywoman Gabriella Mascara. I represent the 4th legislative districts from Camden and Gloucester counties. The reason why I'm interested in this issue is, one, since I was little, I was taught the importance of education, and I got that from my mom. My mom always told me that education is so important, no one can take that away from you. Anything else in life can be taken away from you but your education. That's how important it is. So she instilled that love of education in me, and I'm always learning, and I always strive to learn, even now as an adult. Particularly, I am a new mom, 2 beautiful little girls. My oldest will be 2 in November, and I have my youngest is 4 months old. So this has become even more important in my life because I want to be sure that my daughters are given every single opportunity that they can be afforded, like I was given the opportunity. And I want to instill in them the love of education, the love of learning, and to continue curiosity that I still have as an adult. That love for them to keep learning when they become adults themselves. So that's why it's so important for me to be here, and not also just learning also from you and how I can become not only a better legislator but also a better parent as well. So thank you for the opportunity for being here.
Thank you. An Assemblywoman with young children, and you look so well rested. It's amazing. How does that happen?
Still makeup.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Chen. I'm policy counsel at Advocates for Children of New Jersey. And my interest in early childhood education really came from a desire to improve the equity of opportunity across the country. I taught high school through Teach for America in Chicago, and then I went to law school really knowing that I wanted to find some way to equalize those opportunities. I mean, I grew up in a very, wealthy and economically and racially segregated suburb of Chicago, Naperville, Illinois, if you're familiar. I had access to excellent schools throughout my life, and as I went to both high school and to college, I began to see that not everyone had the same types of opportunities. And so, as I went to law school, I really had in mind the idea of trying to equalize these opportunities. And so one of the projects I worked on in law school was the student clinic that was litigating basically the Connecticut Abbott lawsuit. Spoiler alert, we lost, but I think there were a lot of gains that came out of that, one of which is Connecticut's relatively robust early childhood program. And one of the projects that I worked on was trying to use New Jersey's Abbott program as a model as part of the remedy that we were requesting from the court. Again, even though the litigation itself didn't turn out in the plaintiff's favor, the outcome of having early childhood education in some of the highest poverty districts in Connecticut did succeed. And although it's not as robust as the Abbott program, that's sort of what led me to ACNJ and what led me to work on all the different projects I work on now, many of which are around early childhood education. So I think really it's about trying to find those policy levers that can help equalize opportunity across New Jersey and the country. And early childhood education has a strong track record as something that can accomplish those goals.
Thank you, Peter.
Good morning. I'm Tanya Costin. I'm the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for the Division of Early Childhood at the Department of Education. And like the Assemblywoman, my parents instilled education in us. At 18 and 20, they got married and left the South for a better opportunity for the children they were planning for. My dad, he said he knew when the valedictorian of his graduating class, the only thing she could do was be a teacher. They needed to be in a different place for the children they were planning for. My love for early childhood came almost about 18 years ago. I'm a 21-year veteran of the Department of Education. 18 years ago, I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Ellen Freedy, who, for all of you who know, is well-versed and well-known in the world of early childhood. And I got an opportunity to work with her and learn from her, and that's where my path for early childhood, the love for that really started. And I'm proud to be a part of the legacy that is early childhood in New Jersey, to the point my own children, I always tell people, my own children attended an Abbott program. We were in Burlington City, and they had a wonderful experience, a wonderful opportunity, and they still grow, and they're still learning from that foundation they started so many years ago. And not only academically, but socially, because in Burlington City, they looped, so the children were with their teacher for 2 years, so they did not lose that time. And they also were very big on meeting for inclusion, so our children had a real opportunity to interact with their peers who were from minor things within their IEP, OT, PT, to being on the spectrum. So it was a really good opportunity for children to make friends. And Burlington City is a uniquely dynamic, like lots of communities. There's pretty wealth and working class people on one side, and the other side is very transient, and people are struggling. So it gave children an opportunity to have friends from all walks of lives in all situations. And I think the school district did a really good job of trying to get parents to be very open-minded and be very conscious of how do we include all children, whether it's birthday parties or play dates or anything else that were going on. Through field trips, there were plenty of parents who would donate money to ensure kids could get, like there was no child who left the pumpkin farm without a pumpkin, not worrying about their mom couldn't, their parents or guardians couldn't afford. Parents would make sacrifices to make sure all the children left, all the children had the same opportunity, all the children felt like they were like everyone else and there wasn't a difference, and they had to be concerned with what their families could not provide for them.
Great, thank you, Tanya. Shannon.
Hi, good morning. I'm Shannon Ayers. I am a senior program officer at the Nikolas Foundation. And I think I can sum up my interest in early childhood in one sentence, and here it is. I'm an early childhood educator, full stop, right? If I was tweeting, that would be the whole tweet, right? As Arturo mentioned, I come from the classroom. I was a kindergarten teacher. I was a reading specialist for preschool to grade 5, and I really define myself as an educator. I went on to work at the college level. I worked at the Department of Education for some time, leading or co-leading the Office of Early Literacy. And then I spent 13 years prior to the Nikolas Foundation at the National Institute for Early Education Research at Rutgers University, where I had the pleasure to really dig in deep around research and technical assistance and professional development on this P through 3 continuum. I'm passionate about this work. I have great connections and friends in this room that we work together on improving and sustaining the work here in New Jersey. So being at the Nikolas Foundation now and being able to circle back to this work is really exciting, and really to think bigger about it. So as Arturo mentioned, the inclusion of health into my work and thinking more broadly about early childhood and really the communities that we serve, I think you'll see that as a theme in some of my talking points today.
Thank you, Shannon. So in full disclosure, Shannon and I used to work together at the National Institute for Early Education Research. I think they do great work despite our absence still. So it's great to continue to work with them. Obviously, Nicholson is so fortunate to have them, and we're fortunate to have all of the folks on the panel. It's so important, I think, to start with, why are you doing what you're doing? For many reasons, and I think you heard some very personal and compelling reasons that really tethered to equity concerns. And I think part of the reason that it's important to really keep the why at the foundation that everybody talks about, but this work isn't really easy and it's not getting easier. And as we strive to make some more connections, it's probably going to get harder, when you rub elbows and that kind of stuff, but it's New Jersey, we're used to that stuff, so that's fine. Given that we have these different perspectives that are up here. Let's just open the panel up a little bit. Whoever wants to grab the mic can grab the mic. Just take your own, please, because there's enough for everybody. From the perspective of your position, talking about some of the challenges that could be up ahead, I'm interested, and I'd like for you to talk to these folks about what are some of the biggest obstacles to aligning a high-quality early learning system, and I think the end is very important, what policies would you recommend for bridging these obstacles?
All right.
I gave the appropriate teacher wait time. 5 seconds has passed. Please, grab the mic.
That's a very good question. I think certainly resources are going to be an issue. They're always an issue. Funding for facilities that are appropriate, and helping the public understand that the money that they're paying in their taxes, which we all know are way too high, but that's where we are right now, that it's well spent. And making the argument that preschool and early intervention are actually cost savers to those people who are counting the pennies. I know that we have the information, we have the data that shows us that children and families, because you've got to educate the family along with the children, benefit from quality education early on and parents being exposed to what they can do to support. Because I've often said this, and I love what you said about education is something you can never be taken away from you, because that's something my grandfather used to say all the time. And that's why it was important for him that everybody in the family go to school, including the girls in the family, not just the boys. But how we, I think we need like a plan and a concerted effort to make the case that pre-K pays off, pays dividends, and that I like the concept of pre-K through 3. My daughter taught 3rd grade for a number of years, and she will tell you, she told me all the time, Mom, if they're struggling in 3rd grade, things are not looking good. And they're going to need a lot more in order to catch up. And I think the goal is to have children in a place where they don't have to catch up.
So I think there are 2 sort of large obstacles that we've seen, just thinking about the statewide perspective. The first is just the diversity of districts that are implementing early childhood programs. There are some districts that have a long-standing experience with early childhood through the Abbott program, and there are districts that have very little experience with early childhood. You may have a district where a principal in one building that has pre-K in it has experience with pre-K, and you may have one building where they don't have any experience with early childhood and aren't familiar with the program. So I think the sort of fragmentation of New Jersey's education system has lots of benefits, but it also means that there are challenges to implementing any kind of alignment. And you can look at any grade alignment. Look at elementary to middle school alignment. Look at middle school to high school alignment, right? The kind of drop-offs that we see are common across the board. So that's the first obstacle that we've seen, and particularly as we've tried to provide technical assistance for districts that are applying for the preschool expansion dollars, is there's a wide range of knowledge about early childhood education. I recall a very well-meaning curriculum instructor who came in and said, look, I was a middle school science teacher and I know literally nothing about preschool. I asked him, what do you know about preschool? And he said, I went to preschool and that's it. So, I think, and he was very upfront about it, but I think providing the supports that are needed for those principals, thinking about leadership training programs, thinking about the kinds of training that K through 6 teachers need on early childhood to understand where they're coming from, that's what will be needed for alignment. And I also think that the sort of second piece that's going to be a challenge is the continued sort of test pressure in the sort of part-tested grades. I mean, I think it's not a surprise to educators that the most successful, academic achievement in New Jersey comes in the grades that are not tested, i.e. preschool, right? Whereas the most tested grades have, don't necessarily have great performance. And I think the K through 12, instructors and curriculum have a lot to learn from preschool, from the benefits of play, independent learning, and all of the sort of pieces of high quality early childhood education. So, if principals have to think about, are under the gun for those testing grades, thinking about alignment then is going to be more along the lines of what Zeynep described as like what we don't want, which is a heavy content focus in the early grades rather than instilling the kinds of executive function, social emotional skills that we know are going to make them more successful down the road and lead to the higher graduation rates, rather than thinking about it in terms of whether they can, write their name exactly correct.
Peter, thank you for that, and I'm sure everybody could have a lot to say about obstacles and bridges, and please feel free to filter those comments into some other questions. But since you teed up some administrator understanding, I think that opens up another pathway for some questions, because certainly an issue I frequently encounter throughout the country that impacts early learning is the preparation for administrators and their understanding of early learning. And I think will help to make the case that we're in New Jersey, we're talking about Jersey stuff as Jersey people should do and ought to do and do, but this isn't just a New Jersey issue, certainly. Often principal certification programs are required to complete course content in a variety of topics, right? However, candidates receive little exposure to content related to children younger than 5, little training and supervision and support of early care and education teachers, and few strategies to align instruction across preschool through 3rd grade classrooms. I certainly know that that's true of my principal and superintendent preparation, and really of anybody's. Like there's a paucity of examples throughout the country of where this is really intertwined. So the question that I'd really like to direct to my colleague Shannon, what policies can we enact to address this concern? And if you could describe some of the national work that the Nikolas Foundation has been involved in supporting to address this issue.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to start out with this point that preschool is not an inoculation, right? So that we have preschool is critical, but it's surely not sufficient to carry children on longitudinally. We really need to think about the whole system, P through 3, and pushing up that quality. And that begins with leadership. So thinking about how leaders are prepared pre-service, but also in service, and providing the supports across the continuum. So as we expand preschool access here in New Jersey, I would love to see that this P through 3 Leadership Institute becomes business as usual. Right? We have some strong evidence and strong supports for preschool implementation, such as master teachers, master teacher training. That is just how we do preschool in New Jersey. So as we continue to roll out preschool, it's important to think about the system. So as an administrator, I now have this high quality preschool program. I need to rethink K1, 2, and 3. And what does that mean? For my children and my students that are now coming in, I expect they'll come in differently. It's really important to think across that whole system. I would also love to see some coaches across the K-3 or pre-K-3 system so that we have continuity and alignment of instructional practices. It's been touched upon, play is important, self-directed learning, supporting the curiosity of young children. And we have this incredible opportunity here with NJPSA where we are working currently with 31 schools. That builds on a lot of work that has already been done in New Jersey, going back to ACNJ, the work that the Department of Ed has done through Race to the Top. So this is not new, but what we need to do is think about the sustainability of it. So it can't always be privately funded. We'd love to see a public-private partnership to keep this initiative going. And one piece of that, although Nikolas Foundation funds in New Jersey, we are a state-based foundation, we do see that New Jersey can be a leader in this. And we've had the opportunity to connect this program with the larger national context. So just about 18 months ago, Vincent and I headed out to Seattle, where Christy Cowers, the leader of the National P through 3 Center, pulled together, I think it was between 11 and 16 programs across the nation that are doing some P through 3 work. And we talked about it. Right? So how do you define early childhood leadership? What are the qualities? What are the content pieces that you need to deliver in an institute or a leadership program such as this? And it was really interesting. Very different out there. So at the Nikolas Foundation, we've asked Christy to reconvene that group here in New Jersey in January with a hyper-focus on evaluation. So we know that these programs are important. We know that we need to support our leadership, teacher leaders, administrators, central office, on what early childhood is and how to align it so that it is aligned and continuous for both the child and the families. So we're going to focus on how do we measure this, right? This is complex. So if we can learn from other programs how they're evaluating this, as well as, and I'm going to push the envelope in that room, to think about common metrics across the programs. So nationally, we can have common metrics to think about what works in terms of P through 3 leadership training.
So I'm going to kind of merge a little bit of that and your previous questions when we think about the levers that we need to pull. I think at a state perspective and at a local perspective, when you look at the leadership of programs, it's very important for them to have a knowledge-based understanding. So when they place teachers, when they evaluate teachers, when they support programs, when they push down policies, procedures, supplements, and all kinds of things into preschool, that takes away from the quality of what's happening for children and families is very important. Also, how do we go about improving opportunities for children with IEPs? That all comes from leadership and what people believe and what they think is going to be best for young children. When we think at a state level, when we think of levers, it does become about funding is a huge, huge lever, because when you think about currently, we're only having about 200 districts. The state is is at about $900 million. So when we think about the other 400 districts out there, what does that cost the state? And how do we sustain that? So that's a huge lever. But more importantly, how do we find the workforce? How do we ensure the workforce is diverse? How do we also not negatively affect the other side of the spectrum of the house for us, which is birth to 3? As preschool continues to take up space and resources within the state, it has a very negative effect on what is happening to children under the age of 3. So at a state level, we have to really start looking at early childhood, birth to 3rd grade, not just preschool to 3rd grade. Because children will come behind at preschool if we continue to allow the birth to 3 sector to fall off. Children will still be behind, and then it just becomes sort of a cycle that we can't get out of. So we really have to think about that, our workforce and our funding and the supports that we put at a local level and as a state level of how do we go about supporting people, whether they're administrators or teachers and families, to ensure that there is a system in New Jersey that educates the whole family and the whole child perspective, and it is beyond education. It is about their health and well-being, and we're seeing a lot of that when we think about challenging behaviors for young children, the stress that they come to school with. How do we support some of the educators who themselves are going through lots of trauma, and they're educating some of our youngest and most vulnerable citizens? So there's a big space in there that we need to examine.
So it's interesting, certainly, to hear the panel talk about the diversity of understanding in a very diverse context of New Jersey. It's funny being in travels throughout the country, and people like to say to me, you know, we believe in local control in our state. It's like, please, you have no idea what local control is all about. We kind of know something about local control. And I think what you hear from the panelists, too, is that there needs to be kind of a systematic way of thinking about the diversity of understanding and support for administrators and support for educators, really at every level. Nobody is going to know everything that they need to know about the context in which they're in. In the case of principals, there's lots of people who have principal certifications already and have been doing this work for a long time and might need to enhance their knowledge base. So what's the system for going about doing that and supporting them? And there's some important work going on, and will continue to go on to do exactly that. So the topic of equity has come up a number of times already on the panel, and certainly it's one that I frequently hear throughout the country and in New Jersey. In the early learning context, equity is often couched in the achievement and opportunity gap conversation. So for instance, readiness gap shows that African American and Hispanic children show up to kindergarten already 18 months behind their white peers in literacy and math by the time they enter kindergarten. To compound that, research indicates that this gap widens throughout a child's experience. And I think even more challenging, perhaps, there's evidence that students of color consistently receive less challenging instruction and schoolwork than their white and more affluent peers do. We have this equity conversation, and then talking about what exactly that looks like when children have the experiences in classrooms. So what I'm curious about from the panel, from your perspective, what policies can be enacted to address some of these equity concerns that are pervasive in New Jersey and throughout the country?
That's a really tough one. I served on the school board in my district for 3 terms, and I come from, I'm in South Orange, Maplewood, which is a diverse district, racially, religiously, economically. However, we are still struggling with the issue of equity, and that could take up a whole day or more of conversation. The good news is we're talking about it. The bad news is we haven't figured out how to create real equity. And it's multifaceted, and there are experts on this panel that could, I'm sure, educate me further. But I know that one of the issues is who are the teachers. When my daughter taught in the district, she asked for the elementary school that was most diverse and had the lowest socioeconomic, the highest rate of free and reduced lunch kids. And I know from her frustration that it was all about expectation. She believed her kids could learn and were interested, and guess what? They did. But not all of her coworkers did, because they're kind of in this, you get into a habit, I guess. And a lot of the problems came from expectation, lack of leadership. She went through 4 principals in 6 years. And those challenges, unfortunately, exist throughout the state. And I don't believe that we can legislate everything. What I'm interested in doing is, and I know Gabby is also, we want to hear from the educators. Tell us what you need, and if there's legislation that supports what you're trying to do, then we will be happy to propose it and push it. And I have to tell you, that's not always an easy thing because of the number of districts that we have and the glaring disparities that continue to this day. And it's not just Abbott versus former Abbott versus non-Abbott. It's throughout the system. And I think I know that one of the things that's also compounding the problem, the lack of diversity in the teaching force, and I think there are many reasons for that. That's a whole other topic. But also the growing mental health concerns that we're seeing and hearing about.
Great, thank you.
There is a resource that I'd like to point everyone to. NAEYC, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, just this month released an equity position statement. And it really highlights the policy recommendations and the supports needed in all different sectors. So recommendations for educators, for higher education, for public policy, for administrators, all with the aim to really provide equitable learning experiences for young children. And when I think about, well, what does that mean and what can we do? New Jersey's already implementing one critical piece, and that's expanding high-quality early childhood education. So adequate funding, increasing funding for early childhood to meet the needs so that children are coming ready to learn and the schools are ready for them and meeting their individual needs. I also think that considering the resources for challenging behaviors, and I think Assemblywoman, you touched on that a little bit, this idea that we need to acknowledge what children bring to the classroom and meet them where they are. We know that we have an issue nationally with preschool expulsion and suspension rates. research has just come out with the tie of that to adverse childhood experiences. So the odds ratio goes up 80% with each ACE a child has on their odds of being either expelled or suspended from preschool. So we need to do better. We need to train our staff on healing-centered approaches. We need to think about families and the needs that they have outside of the school system. It's really important that the teachers know where a child can get a pair of glasses. They need to know the housing authorities. They need to know the mental health providers. They need to know the health center, and make this a comprehensive approach for the children.
So just to tie a few things together, along the lines of the diversity of the teaching workforce, I do think that the mixed delivery system is an important part of that. I think one of the great successes of Abbott was taking childcare providers who were largely women of color and providing training so that they could become high-quality early childhood educators. I think in many ways that's sort of the untold story of Abbott, is the extent to which it professionalized a workforce in an equitable way that maintained the diversity of that teaching staff for those for the Abbott districts. And I think really encouraging mixed delivery system. And when we say mixed delivery, obviously we're talking about childcare or Head Start centers providing preschool, but it also means this sort of holistic approach that Shannon's describing of engaging the healthcare provider, engaging mental health consultation, engaging all of these different community resources. So you really have a mixed delivery system, and it's not just on those 6 hours a day that the child is in the building that are the only intervention that we're making. And just to tie back to something that Zeynep mentioned earlier, and this question of expectations, thinking about all those domains that we're talking about curiosity and about sort of independent and social emotional learning, those should not be viewed as like luxury standards that are placed on top of the content ones. Like, let's do the content first, but then we'll deal with curiosity and other stuff later. Like, the solution in early childhood for, I think, this deficit mindset of the kids are behind. Oh no, they're going to be behind 18 months by the time they get to kindergarten. We've got to catch them up. Let's drill and kill Daniel Tiger to get these kids up to speed. And it's like, well, that's not really the way to get the we have to be really dedicated to the standards that are behind it, high quality early childhood education, because they have within them, I think, a lot of the principles of equity, of trying to make sure that these higher order learning skills are not a luxury item, that they are fundamental to, the early childhood system.
So I know Daniel Tiger would certainly resist drill and kill, having grown up on Daniel Tiger. I know that for a fact. Assemblywoman, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, just to, I guess, reiterate what everyone in the panel has just mentioned about the issue with equity. I think one of the things that's really important to stress is the partnerships that we have, the private and public partnerships that we have with Head Starts and with our daycare facilities. And the reason I say that is because the only way, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, to have a successful birth to 3, including with preschools, educational system is for there is to be a continuity, a partnership, because I'm looking at, as a legislator, I'm focusing on how logistically this is going to work. And facilities, the issues of facilities in our state is a huge problem because we have a lot of older communities and we have different regions. So what might make sense in northern New Jersey might not make sense in central New Jersey, might not even make sense in the southern end of the state. We also have to take into account how old our school buildings are. Mm-hmm. So facilities, in order to the end goal is equity, what we have to is start thinking outside of the box, because some school districts cannot afford to build a new building. Right. Cannot afford to, and if we can, that's fantastic, but it's not in the budget. Some municipalities just can't do it. And so that's why I think we have to reiterate that we all have to work together and start working and start really thinking about having these partnerships with Head Starts and daycare centers, and including them in the conversation, and having them be part of this success story for our children, because it's very important. Because, our school districts these days, they're going to be given an immense responsibility that I don't think that they will definitely need the support system in order to succeed, in order to do what we as the state want them to do.
So thank you for your response to a very complex question. We can spend an entire day. The department recently did spend an entire day talking about equity, and it's certainly one that even if you do spend an entire day, it's not over after that day. There's a lot more to come. So I have one more question, then I'm going to open it up to participants in the audience. Actually, I have lots more questions. I could do this all day. But we'll go one more. Everybody here is greatly appreciative of the presence of both of the Assemblywomen. So I would like to ask, just for the two of you, please, in one way or another, you have talked about political will and getting, helping the public to understand. And certainly political will is often seen as an essential element to high-quality preschool specifically. But what supports, I don't know if you get asked of what supports you need often, but I think it's important for me to ask you that. What supports do you need to help to create the political will that will help us to align preschool to third grade?
Wow, that's quite a question. Let me start by saying that as I was listening to the conversation just now, in terms of what we need, community schools. That model, the model of the community school comes to mind because that model embraces a neighborhood, it embraces a community, and it's kind of like one-stop shopping for parents in terms of being able to get the child's vision examined and, health needs. But I think, I don't know how we get people to move outside of their cubicles, outside of their communities. We have over 500 school districts, and I've had the opportunity to travel around the state and see a lot, from pre-K through college. And I'm always struck with how segregated we are. And our segregation comes from our housing patterns. And how you begin to break that down is very difficult politically and in many other ways. I guess perhaps the hope lies in this next generation of young people who want to live in more urban areas, want to live near transportation, and seem to recognize, more than the older generation perhaps, the richness of being in communities that are diverse in every way. And in terms of, and so when you have politicians who believe in that, then what we need is support so that we don't get voted out, right? There are topics that I like to talk about that I know are the third rail, but they're important because somewhere we have to break this cycle of everybody going to their little places. And New Jersey, for such a small state, it's amazing how segregated we are. And I don't just mean racially. I mean by religion, I mean by economics. And I think we have to start thinking more globally. And for that, we need to talk to each other, and certainly as politicians / policymakers, I think that's where most of us are. But it needs leadership also from the top, and I think that we do have at this point a governor who believes in that. It's a conversation that I've had with him for over 4 years now, when I first met him. And we talked about education the entire time and the importance of our public schools being able to provide opportunity for every child and for every family.
Thank you.
So I guess my contribution to the conversation would be it's the working relationships that we have, the Assemblywoman and I, with organizations, how that's very crucial to have open lines of communication. We deal with a lot of, as legislators, we deal with a lot of different issues, and we might not know what goes on in every sector of the state. So we highly depend on individuals that this is their passion, that this is their sole purpose, this is what that drives them. So we depend on experts to meet with us, to come see us, or we go see them, and let us know what is going on at the ground level, because that's the only way that we know what to do, and we depend on you to tell us. That's why when I have opportunities to speak before individuals or groups like this, that's what I say. I'm like, I depend on you, the experts, to tell me what needs to get changed in Trenton. I'm just I look at myself as just a person that can help you facilitate that change. That's what I was elected to office, to help you facilitate the change, to change the law. So I humbly serve, and I know that the Assemblywoman also humbly serves to change what needs to get changed, and to improve what needs to get improved, and to advocate, on issues that need to get strengthened. But we do our job the best when we speak with groups.
Right.
And that's how we look at it in Trenton.
Great.
Yeah.
We certainly thank you for your service, and we thank you for your presence this morning, as I know everybody in the audience does. And speaking of the audience, I know I've seen people taking some vigorous notes over there. We do have time for a few questions. If you will please, there will be some mics circulating. You just throw your hand up so we know where to get a microphone to, and you could ask away.
Hello.
We got you.
Hi, my name is Tanisha White, Plainfield Public School District. I think our biggest concern and issue in Plainfield is that, well, I can speak for myself in doing this for 9 years and trying to push up from early childhood into K, into first, into second, into third. We make progress, then new administration comes in and we fall back and we have to start again. So I think my question, and I'm quite sure a lot of other people would like to know, in terms of mandating some of these policies so that it starts from the top up and it's pushed down instead of pushed up, to make these changes. Everything's like a recommendation or encouraged. And I think that's where we're kind of stuck, because it has to come from the top down.
So, I mean, from a state perspective, I mean, we are trying to balance the unique needs of a community, our home rule of what many people want. So when the state steps in and mandates, and we in preschool have a lot, and people are very concerned about the ones we already have, and we get pushed back a lot. So, I mean, it's a huge balancing game between, but I think probably in preschool we have the most regulations and directives probably than any other grade band in this, in other grades. But I mean, we continue to have that conversation about how we're going to do that and where we're going to implement and what will be required. But once you start to require things, it does take away some flexibility districts then want to meet their unique needs of their population.
But along those lines, I do think something that Zeynep mentioned earlier in her sort of blue sky vision of, ideal world of ensuring that building leaders and district administrators have at least an early childhood certificate. Maybe it's only 9 hours, but that if you're going to be in a building that's managing, children in the P through 3 age range, you should have additional training on P through 3.
Tanisha, your question is one that came up quite a bit when we did training with teachers on the 1st through 3rd grade guidelines, right? So great guidelines, really powerful. They resonated with the educators that we were working with, but they did want it as a mandate. And I think that that's not unique to Plainfield. And what I would say to that is, we need you to keep on trucking, right? So we need your voice in the district. So have your elevator speech ready, have the document ready, make the case. We talk a lot about educators and teachers being advocates, and it is hard and tiresome, and you get beat down sometimes, and it's very easy to say, I tried. But we ask that you use that guidance that the Department of Education has provided, because there are rich resources that DOE has available. And, we talk about that as your security blanket, right? We hear from teachers that they're scared. They're fearful, right? But then we meet with administrators and they say, oh, our teachers would never teach like that. So keep on, keeping on, and really advocate for those kind of practices that are good.
Good morning, and thank you for your comments. I'd just like to follow up what Peter and Assemblywoman JC said about diversity. And you had mentioned in a lot of, Peter, in a lot of our early childhood programs, you have women of color. But I think what needs to be addressed is getting more men, and especially men of color, into the teaching force, not only at the preschool level, but throughout the entire early elementary years, because I'm a mentor for the Nicholson Grant, and going into these schools, and I make it a point to go into classrooms and just say hello to the children. The looks I get from some of these young men of color, I could have probably been one of the first men they've seen in a classroom besides the principal. And I had the chance in one school to read to the students, and I thought that I'm probably one of the only men who ever read to some of these students, especially our Latino young men. So I think the state does have an initiative for teacher recruitment, and I think they really need to make an effort to try at the early grades, the preschool level, to try to recruit more men of color to be role models, because a lot of our young people do not have a father or, a single parent family.
A couple more.
That's a great point.
Hi. So I'm actually reacting to the first question. My name is Ron Chalwisan. I'm with New York Trust for Education. While I do believe that kind of this top-down process is an important part of the equation, my question is, what are the concerted efforts from the community engagement side up? So deep knowledge of a lot of the things that we talked about today, about what are core strategies for early childhood education, what should parents and community members be looking for when they go to a center or go to a school, what should they be demanding of school boards? So is there support for concerted and intensive community engagement strategies that would create an equal pressure up? And if you know of those, where are they so that we could learn from them?
So I don't think there is, I don't think they're consistent in all the communities. I think there are a lot of initiatives going around family engagement and trying to connect and empower parents that you find across, from the state level, across state agencies. So one of the initiatives that came out of Race to the Top that is still going on is our county councils. Those county councils are represented, they're supposed to be 51% parents, and not a parent in the sense that I show up and and say, well, I'm a parent because I have a kid, but true parents from that community to help empower parents to have a voice and to be able to get answers to their questions. when we think about Grow NJ Kids, they only not have a rating system part for programs, but one of the things they eventually want to build out is sort of like a consumer reporting, similar to you would see for restaurants and anything. You would be able to look up providers, you would be able to see their ratings, just like on now on the licensing website, you can look up a provider and see if they have violations. You can see have they remedied them. There's information you can find out about those programs that you go to. Also, under Grow NJ Kids, they do have like a handout for parents, questions they should ask, whether your child is going to a home provider, if you're going to a, child care center, public school, so they do have some resources for parents of things they should look for, questions they should ask. So they are trying to build that out at this time.
And I think if you Google pre-K, preschool, what should I look for in my child's preschool, there's a lot there. If you Google what should I look for in my kid's third grade classroom, you're not going to turn up that much. One resource, though, is the Department of Education has videos that range all the way preschool through third grade that demonstrate high-quality classrooms. So I think that's a place to start with the community. Show them what high quality looks like and ask them to respond, and then empower them and advocate, build their advocacy skills that I know ACNJ does to demand those kinds of high-quality experiences for their children.
And I think there's also, along those lines, there's there's a gap in some of the knowledge of early childhood for many of the parents who are entering the system, not just in the sense, again, I think there are knowledge gaps about early childhood across the board, including with, professionals and people who are engaged in the work on a regular basis. But I think building some of that knowledge is really critical, and I think that a lot of programs currently build that in as part of their recruitment to get into the preschool in the first place. But trying to expand the role of the parent in the early childhood system, I think, is something that has been a struggle for the system for a long time, and allowing parents to, for example, drop into a classroom when you're thinking about alignment, having the parents take the kid to visit kindergarten after they finish, during their preschool year, that they go visit the kindergarten and see what it's like. What's a day of kindergarten like? Those kinds of experiences in the classroom, I think, are extremely important. Yeah.
I guess I'm hearing the answers from the resource part, and I guess what I think about is the parents that we interact with, right, are not the parents necessarily that have the time and wherewithal and knowledge to access those resources. So I guess my question is much more about where are there, if there are efforts for thinking about the set of parents, right, who are not necessarily engaged in the kind of in knowledge of the formal system to actually learn about those things, right? Is there an effort through churches? Is there an effort through local, just to try to figure out, because we have a whole set of parents who, for many reasons, when their work hours are different than their experience with the school system has been a negative school experience, right? So thinking about where parents who might not necessarily access the system are, and then efforts through those mechanisms to get knowledge to try to start to build the bridge so that you expand the number of kids accessing the quality places that exist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's a parents inherently, in many ways, trust the school to handle it. They're like, if they're putting the kid in the program, there is a sort of, and particularly the parents that you're describing, they have a lot of things on their mind, and so saying, okay, now here's the P through 3 curriculum and standards, and this is how, I think that we have to be very mindful of how to provide information to parents that's empowering rather than just another stack of, if you've been in a child care center or preschool, you've seen the stacks of brochures on the resource table. And I think the question is is that necessarily the best way to be conveying the information to parents? And I think it's a tough question. I don't think there's a knockout answer for how to empower parents to become a more active part of their of an early childhood system. And I think there are lots of pieces here, but it gets back to the Assemblywoman's point about about everyone kind of being in their cubicle, and that parent engagement is seen in many ways as still like an add-on to education rather than a core part of it.
So at times it definitely is hard to engage parents in a system that is in many ways a non-system, and talked about right as a non-system. One of the explicit points of the county councils that Tanya talked about is to do exactly what you asked for, to engage parents, family members, because they're not always parents, frequently not, in the services, and just to let them know, how are people going to know that these great things exist? So you might want to follow up with Tanya on the existence of the county councils, as that is an objective. I'm happy that Peter mentioned about the open lines of communication, because certainly for parents and then for educators as well, these kind of convenings are essential. And then getting down to the nuts and bolts that I think both of the Assemblywomen talked about. To make a plug, on February the 11th, New Jersey ASCD, Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, called at one time, but NJASCD, is hosting the 4th annual Early Childhood Summit, where there'll be a collection of national experts, many of the people in this room, to do exactly the pushing up that we're asking for in this room. Open the lines of communication, connect with organizations. It's not that people are unwilling, it's that people don't know. You know, some of the people don't know, some of the educators don't know things that we know. There's lots of things that I don't know as an educator that I need to make connections with as well. I'm sure Mary and perhaps others could help circulate the agenda when it's out to folks in this room. Be a collection of hundreds of superintendents, administrators, teachers in preschool to 3rd grade and beyond space, as well as national experts. So you'll want to definitely look for that. And you'll also definitely want to join me in giving a round of applause for this illustrative panel and thanking them. Okay, so you know the saying, so nice, let's do it twice, right? So here we are, here I am again with this, you know, it's such an interesting look at the day of starting with this national, state and national perspective. And I think an important takeaway is some of the things that we are experiencing in New Jersey is certainly not a New Jersey only thing, but experienced throughout the country, and hearing some wonderful perspectives of policy and system changes that could be made. And what's, you know, the next step of that is, yeah, it's great to talk about policy and system changes, but then there are folks who actually need to do this stuff. One of the next trips that I have on my calendar is to Colorado, and I've been working with some districts in Colorado. There's a lot of legislation throughout the country passed to address reading by 3rd grade, dyslexia legislation. Addressing dyslexia and reading is very important. But then there's also this other legislation that talks about kindergarten readiness and making sure that children are ready by kindergarten, and having kindergarten teachers do these kindergarten readiness plans. And then at the district level, people are like, what the hell do you want me to do with this stuff? What exactly, how do we make this work? And that's where some of the work that I get involved in happens. And what's interesting is, that's the same thing throughout the country. And some things I think you'll hear very much about this panel of people who are at different intersections of thinking about how we prepare teachers for addressing that, as well as at the district level and program level. So we're very excited to have another wide array of participants who I am going to, again, let introduce. And just like in the first panel, hearing a little bit about why they do this work to begin with is going to be the start. And although I was a former kindergarten teacher and like this orderly thing, what I'll do is flip it up and start with the other side of the table. And very briefly, if you could describe, give a brief bio and describe why you're interested in the early learning field.
I'm Heidi Zaynep, and I'm the Executive Director of Monmouth Daycare Center. I think I've always been interested in early learning. I was one of those people that I interview now who says, I've always loved children and I don't want to hire them because that's not what it's about only. But because I'm passionate. I'm passionate about the families, and I'm passionate about these children getting a head start in their lives. Monmouth Daycare Center has been around for 50 years, and I've been there for 20 of those years. And our children are struggling, and their families are struggling to get a head start and stop the cycle of poverty. So we partner with the Red Bank Board of Education. This is our 11th year. So we are a testament to that this can work. And that's why I'm here today, to show people that it really can work.
Thank you. Renee.
Hello, my name is Renee Whalen. I'm an assistant professor for William Patterson University. And I've worked in the early childhood field for about 25 years, starting as an early childhood teacher, then an instructional coach, master teacher, then actually went on loan to the Department of Education and worked with Tanya Costin and led the master teacher seminar there. Then I was an early childhood principal, director of early childhood for Long Branch Public Schools, and I have to say that I have absolutely learned so much in all of those positions, and now I am excited to help prepare our future teachers, because we know that the development of children is so variable, right, in the early childhood years, and it's rapid. And so if we can strengthen our alignment from birth through third grade, those children are going to be better off, as far as their long-term outcomes as well. And we have that research to back it up.
Please.
Good morning. My name is Winifred Smith-Jenkins, and I supervise neurodevelopmental architects who partner with parents to raise the next lawyer, doctor, police officer, plumber, teacher. This is just a fancy way of saying I'm a child care director who manages 3 family-owned child care centers, better known as ZADIs, with locations in both Summit and East Orange. I have a bachelor's in biology and chemistry and a master's in health administration, and I'm currently enrolled in Harvard University's Early Education Leadership Certificate program. My passion for the last 18 years has been to create a high-quality learning environment that nurtures, educates, and develops the next generation, because we do not only change the lives of children, it also transforms communities. Therefore, it is my humble honor to sit on this panel discussing how to align pre-K to third grade, because our action or inaction can have lifelong effects. As my mom likes to say, we will pay one way or the other, either on the front end or the back end.
Thank you.
Joe Cullen, Newark Public Schools. I've been with the district for 22 years and 13 years as principal of Branchbrook School, which is a pre-K to 4th grade elementary school in the north part of Newark. I was part of the first cohort about 10 years ago through New Jersey Department of Education and ACNJ in developing leaders pre-K to 3rd grade. It was an ongoing professional development institute that then had a second part of it, and for the past 10 years, I've been part of different conferences and summits in dealing with pre-K to 3rd grade leadership. Currently, I'm part of the development team that is now working with many districts throughout the state in pre-K to 3rd grade Leadership Institute. We completed 2 sessions, and we have another session coming up in October. And I just really am passionate about being a leader in supporting teachers, staff, families, and most importantly, students.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Monica Carmichael. I am the Director of the Office of Early Childhood for Trenton Public School District, overseeing the preschool program, servicing about 2,500 preschool children. I'm honored to be here today with you. My background in early childhood began in undergraduate. I have a bachelor's degree in early childhood with a minor in biology. Of course, that is my passion. I come from a household of 2 parents who are educators. However, my start into this world from birth was not easy. I was a premature baby, 3 pounds and 4 ounces. So growing up, my parents helped to provide that extra strong foundation, and I believe I am who I am today because of their strong foundation. I also realized that many of our children in the city of Trenton, I am a Trentonian, do not have the same structural and household that I had. So with that given, all 2,500 children, although I do not have any by birth, all 2,500 are my children. So I serve every single day as if they are my children. I'm happy to serve as a school administrator in the city of Trenton, representing the New Jersey Department of Education. So my passion is all children, because all children deserve a fresh start, as well as their parents need to receive professional development, training, understanding, and resources so that they can give their children the very best, because all of the children don't live in the same household that many of us in this room grew up in or lived in as we were young children. Thank you.
So obviously, we have the right people in front of us over here. It's personally wonderful to see all of you. I know many of you for a long time. Monica and I taught first grade together in Trenton. Me as a long-term sub. Monica is a well-established first grade teacher. Joe was, I was part of that first leadership, preschool to third grade leadership series. Renee and I have worked together for a long time. Certainly Winifred and Heidi, I wish I'd known you for a very long time, because you're both very impressive and doing great things. And it's great to see people have many different roles in the field and come in at different places and involve. Often the place that you start out in is not the place that you wind up in, certainly. But regardless of where you are, certainly a moment in our field where everybody needs to take a leadership perspective and leadership position. So to be working with others, to be identifying their leadership or developing or tinting their leadership lens is certainly something that's very important. And given that there's a variety of positions here, similar question to how we started off the first panel, with from the perspective of your position, and anybody could grab the mic and jump in here. What are some of the obstacles to aligning high-quality early learning, and how would you recommend bridging these obstacles?
So I do believe that we need to provide more professional learning experiences, but with the tools to be able to implement those practices learned. So what I mean by that is we have very passionate people who deliver excellent early childhood content based on their own experiences throughout the state of New Jersey. See a lot of friendly faces out in the audience. However, the reality is we do have some high turnover in districts, as well as in our providers, where we want to build capacity in our teacher leaders, but also strengthen the understanding of our administration, so they understand what it means to look for developmentally appropriate practices. So even in the recent funding of preschool expansion, I have been talking to several friends in neighboring towns about what their vision is for high-quality early childhood education. And many of them don't have the background. So I know that at the preschool level, utilizing structured observation tools have really worked. So what I mean by that is we had training for leaders as well as coaches on tools such as the Eckers in class and so what are the tools that we can use from kindergarten through third grade that can align to their current evaluation systems? I know, Vincent, you even put together something for the Danielson framework. So it's really training, I think, the leaders to understand what those practices look like by utilizing those tools, as well as a deeper understanding of student learning. So at the college level, we do a lot of work on having teachers understand developmental trajectories, or the continuum. I kind of, use those words interchangeably, and it's also having our leaders truly understand what developmental trajectories look like. So that way, if this particular child is not ready to do X, Y, and Z, well, where is that child on this continuum, and what can we do in order to support that child and help that child progress on the continuum? And a great way of doing that is having an assessment system, a formative assessment system that does look at child development from birth to 3 or pre-K through 3. So those are my thoughts.
Great, thank you, Renee. Others?
I was just going to add to that. Thank you, Renee, for sharing. That we also need to improve the alignment for our coaches or specialists within the state of New Jersey. Because I work with the preschool population, we have the term master teachers. And our master teachers in preschool have to go through a fellowship for a year with the New Jersey Department of Education, which requires intensive training, support, reflection as they work in their current position. Unfortunately, from K up with our coaches and specialists, we don't have a structure in place that provides that same kind of support, routine, or mandates. So that is one area that we could definitely work to tighten up that alignment. In addition is also funding. Funding to support the classrooms. Yes, our preschool classrooms through expansion receive certain funding for certain things in the classroom for high quality. However, in many of our districts, and I can speak for Trenton as well as my other colleagues in other districts, our kindergarten, first grade, second grade classrooms are not receiving the extra funding to provide the resources in the classroom for children to have high quality experiences. I'm pretty sure many of us can relate to a teacher saying they've spent out of pocket buying crayons and pencils and other things. But if those items are in those classrooms, then our children would be afforded the same experiences whether they're in preschool, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, or third grade. And then the last area is, I know we're getting ready to experience the rollout of the self-assessment validation system, which is a wonderful tool, which I call it my book, for guidance and expectations for preschool. With that pending rollout coming for K through 3, I believe once that comes out, that will help eliminate some of those obstacles because there will be a book or a guide with expectations for our districts to try to be uniform in the alignment to service all children so that that gap from preschool through grade 3 isn't so much existent. Thank you.
I think when we look at the mixed delivery system, funding is definitely an issue because generally our budgets are flat funded, and so therefore, you know, when you're looking to hire teachers, you're trying to figure out how to do it within the constraints that you're given, right? And therefore, it leads to a lot of staff turnover because you can go to a district school and make more money than you can at a provider site. The lack of combined professional development so that, you know, pre-K teachers are sitting in the same room as K, first, second, and third grade teachers, and they're understanding how it's all related. And then finally, I think one of the other obstacles is early interventions to address challenging behaviors. We know a lot of our little ones are coming into the school district just learning about being kind and sharing, but they're also experiencing some things at home or in their environment that can be extremely traumatizing, and not having, I guess, immediate resources in place to address those.
Thank you so much. So, you know, one of the things that Renee mentioned was the different visions for high quality, and all of you talked about kind of establishing some kind of common understanding. So in my work with states and districts throughout the country, there's a growing interest in addressing the needs of the whole child. And almost as much as I certainly support addressing the whole child and talk a lot about it, it's almost getting too watered down. It's like, okay, it's good to address the needs of the whole child, but there are these whole families and whole communities and a whole bunch of wholeness that needs to be addressed, right? So it's essentially not just about whole children, as important as that is. But yet, when we're talking about whole child, not everybody talks about it in the same way. EdSurge just had a study that they put out of a survey of hundreds of teachers who all talk about whole child in different ways, right? So if everybody's not talking about whole child learning and development in the same way, and we need to kind of establish this common vision for high quality early learning that has whole child at the forefront, what does addressing the needs of the whole child look like to you? And what practices do you think should be put in place to address the needs of the whole child?
Well, for me, the whole child starts with the social emotional. because that's the crux of everything. If they're developing there, they're going to be able to learn and move forward. So we're doing the social emotional, we're doing food, making sure they're clothed also. We provide coats to our families, and the whole child's also that whole family with resources for them, as we spoke earlier about housing and ways to get food. My off-site facility has a WIC program there every month so the families can get that. So we're being sure that their siblings are getting what they need also. So to me, that's the whole child, and I think a lot of that comes down to reaching out into the community that you're in and training the family workers that we have through the early childhood program to get those resources for the family so that the children can grow completely.
I was going to add that in Trenton, last school year 18-19, our district went to a different mixed delivery system. We now only have contracted preschool provider locations servicing our preschool children. It was a new endeavor that our superintendent wanting to service the whole child. We had in-district classrooms. His idea or concept was to move them all to contracted provider locations where the extra resources, such as having a family worker, one family worker for every 45 children versus having a parent liaison for a school of 500. So in Trenton, to service the whole child, and my concept is that entry transition survey. All of our children, households are surveyed prior to them coming in. We dissect the data to see what are some of the needs of the family, the parents, as well as we get a clear understanding of the child when they come in. Our family workers are then assigned to parents at various locations, depending upon their language, also depending upon their background in the community area. Our contracted providers traditionally tend to hire individuals that are from the community or a community equitable to the city of Trenton. So they have resources that they're aware of, and our community parent involvement specialist supports them with gaining resources. So one, getting the information of what the need is for the child, providing that caring, nurturing environment, also instituting that learning experience, but also exposing the teachers, teacher assistants, and all staff at the site to be cognizant of the population in which they work and the students that they support. So providing training. So in our department, we train all staff, just went through a cycle of training the first week of school to help them understand and refresh them on all children are not you. So being responsive to the individual children at the site, whether you are the custodian, you are the secretary, you are the teacher in the classroom or the teacher assistant, but also how to handle children who are having difficulty. Right now in the city of Trenton, our city is faced with some shooting situations that are going on. So there's some traumatic experience, but trying to keep things normal. So actually next week we have our first professional development on Wednesday, and so we're addressing that whole population, all staff in our entire preschool program, to ensure that our staff are aware of what's going on, but how to help support children who really don't understand the world around them and what's taking place in their environment. So supporting the whole child is that child, Vincent, but also supporting that household, because that household is who takes care of that child beyond the school day. And then also the staff in that building need to understand beyond 3:25 in the afternoon, that child goes home to a home or an environment that sets the stage for them until the next day they return.
It's interesting, the conversation around whole child and what this study showed, and often, and I'll use some examples to talk about different ways of talking about whole child. There is this folks who focus on contextual or environmental needs to support the whole child, which is very important. And then other folks, in particular, this is how the early childhood community talks about whole child, of individuals, developmental domains. I will say in many ways that we feel like traditional K-12 kind of ignores with individual children. Part of the point here is that both are important, right? And bridges need to be built between both conceptions, because one really can't exist without the other. And I know, Joe, you were going to say something there.
So being in a building that has a pre-K in the elementary school, we certainly benefit from the support of the PERT team and the teacher coach, and they're wonderful. But then utilizing the resources we have in the school. So we think of our school as pre-K through 4th grade. So when our student support teams meet consistently each week, we're talking about each of the children from pre-K up to 4th grade, and all the necessary people are at the table there to talk about the whole child. So you have the nurse, you'll have the parent liaison, you'll have an attendance counselor, you'll have a social worker, you'll have myself, so that we are all talking about each of the children and looking at the whole child.
And the early childhood advisory councils are a great avenue to have these discussions about the whole child, because typically you'll have, representatives from the hospital, university representatives attend, as well as other community services to support children. And it's a matter of meeting families where they're at, so actually going into the communities in order to support them, and we know we can't do it alone, so having, again, opportunities to have these discussions and to develop a common vision with agencies outside of a school is imperative to support each and every child.
Does anybody on the panel participate in an early childhood advisory council? Could you talk, anybody grab the mic? Can you talk about your experience on the council?
Well, actually, I just went to a meeting yesterday, and what was wonderful is that it was all different agencies from the community coming in, and we actually were talking about how we can all network and bring the other agencies together to meet with the parents and be available to the parents, and figuring out how it is easy, how difficulties of getting the parents out and how we can make it easier for them so we can support them. So it's really just the whole community working together for the family, at least in Red Bank with us.
It's interesting because these happen at different levels. Early Childhood Advisory Council on a local level. The argument behind Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge is that needs to happen on the state level, Department of Education, Health, Human Services, Children and Families. Without the right systems operating, early childhood advisory councils and the work that you're describing becomes even more difficult. Certainly some of the work that's funded through Nikolas Foundation and bringing health agencies with education together, also an important part of what this actually looks like in practice. Now this is fun, because this is where the rubber hits the road a little bit as well. You heard Zeynep talk a little bit about this skills and content juxtaposition, if you will. And certainly, think about the requirements we described in the earlier panel pertaining, and even what we talked about right now, pertaining to the need to balance whole child approaches with content. And that looks very real to superintendents and districts that have, third grade reading requirements, timed literacy blocks, requirements to screen for dyslexia. All this stuff is important, right? I see districts throughout the country struggle with what I call a real estate problem, right? That is, there's only so much space or real estate in a school schedule to fit all this stuff in that we actually want to do. And it becomes problematic to pay attention to the whole child when you have this, well, what about this dyslexia stuff that we need to address as well? So I'm curious from the panel, what strategies have you employed to fix the real estate problem, if at all? And if you're struggling with this as well, what would you recommend doing to help you to fit it all in? I'll definitely give appropriate teacher wait time on that one.
So building teacher leadership capacity is critical because sometimes in certain situations there are point people in order to either address an issue or administer a particular initiative. And it really does have to be a team approach, but there has to be teacher leaders that are part of this mission, right? And not this top-down approach, and providing the training as well as the autonomy to be able to do that can help support some of the time management issues and getting everything done. But you also need the structures and systems in place in order for that to happen. So what I mean by that is, does the structure, so does the schedule from preschool through third grade allow for opportunities for, teachers to meet, to have PLC time? do children have opportunities to have gross motor time within their daily schedules? Again, not just in preschool, where they're going out 2 times, but what about in kindergarten, first grade, where we know brain activity is, it's stimulated when they have gross motor time, and it will support their learning. So we have to re-examine some of the structures that we have in place and the systems in order to build leadership capacity, as well as the professional learning for the leadership.
Joe?
Sure. So I would also say that during the course of the day, that teachers are taking notes and getting data on each individual child. So we know in pre-K, teachers do a really good job of this because it's such an important part of their day. So in kindergarten to 3rd grade, we're also emphasizing making sure that we're getting good documentation and taking good notes to get data to inform our instruction. But then along the way, we can see where the needs are of each child and then really, have teachers start to differentiate that instruction. So when you see a pre-K teacher working in a small group with students and you see a lot of good differentiation and taking notes, we are emphasizing that in kindergarten to 3rd grade, especially during guided reading time, small group instruction, both in math and literacy. And I think that's a really good way of getting information on each child and then informing the instruction that needs to happen and then whether a child needs interventions or not.
Monica, were you going to?
And I was going to say, I can speak with Trenton, building leadership capacity not only with the teachers and teacher leaders, but also the directors and the overseers at our contracted providers is a big piece. Making sure that they are afforded training because, as we know, leadership starts the trend. So for their understanding of the whole child, providing them training, supporting them with looking at the schedules, having the master teachers, myself, and the other supervisors go into the location to support them in their work. So although we may have mandates and we provide the training, actually going into the centers to provide the actual anchored support to the directors that are there, but also with our in-district elementary school principals, this year we've been afforded the opportunity to participate in the Transforming Early Childhood Initiative, thanks to NJPSA as well as the Nikolas Foundation. And as a result of that, we have 5 elementary schools that are participating. So in the goal, the submission was done by myself, was that if we could get 5 of our schools in this round, perhaps we will have another round and we could have 5 additional schools, so that the information and the learning takes place with those administrators, but also with their individual teams in the various settings, so that what we're doing in preschool transforms into the elementary setting. The only obstacle I can say is trying to make sure that the players stay in the seat, which we typically don't have the oversight of. As we know, we have leaders that move, but even with that said, if we have 1 leader or 2 leaders that move and there are 3 others that retain the information, and I'm very happy today to have a fellow leader here with me from that initiative, we're making progress. So that is a start for the City of Trenton.
So I'll point out that the mark of a good leader is to ask for additional funding while there are funders in the room. That's always a good strategy there. So Winifred and Heidi, what I thought of, I was thinking of you with this question in regard to, so, districts are saying, look, we have this real estate problem, we have to fit all of this stuff in, and make sure the kids that you're sending us are able to do all of this stuff. That often gets challenging on the provider end of letting people know, well, we actually do this stuff and here's what it looks like. How do you navigate the pressure from a district of here's all the stuff that we fit in and make sure you get in line? If either of you could address that.
I must say, our district doesn't put that pressure on us.
There you go. You work with great people. That's the strategy.
I do. We're a team. We have great master teachers, and they're in there helping us and supporting us. And I have, people are talking about their turnover. I'm blessed. Some of my teachers have been with me my whole 11 years of partnering with the Red Bank Board of Education. So for me, it hasn't been a challenge. It's just tweaking it a little bit to fit into a whole child care center is the challenge more, because I have 5 other classrooms. So I do have these things that I have to do for my pre-K kids that are Red Bank, but I have to fit in the 5 other classrooms, like the playground time and the multipurpose room time and the meal times and all that. That's more of a challenge than getting everything else done.
So you have a kind of different real estate problem in some
Yeah.
regards. Like, it's great that you have to fit all this stuff in district. Here's the stuff that we have to fit in as well. So certainly an underappreciated challenge, I think, from a provider end as well. Winifred, anything to add, or do you work in as blissful as an environment?
So it is blissful. I think it definitely starts at the top and making sure that I give my teachers the motivation to understand that this is what we need to do to get the job done, to convey that what is happening in our classrooms matter because it's followed by dollars, right? And if we can't convey that message, then we may not have funding later on, right? So we have to do this, but then what supports can I provide you as a director to help make sure you're doing what you need to do for our little ones and for the district?
I appreciate that. And so we talked about whole child, fitting it all in, developmentally appropriate practices. So let's talk about developmentally appropriate practices in the context of equity. And I want to talk about it like that because I had recently written a piece, an opinion piece in Hechinger that put these two concepts together that built on a claim I would always hear as a kindergarten teacher. And it goes something like this. So developmentally appropriate practices in many ways are the cornerstone of the early learning field. You can't talk about early learning without talking about developmentally appropriate practices. And they require 3 things. I know, again, Renee had talked about defining this vision. Not everybody talks about developmentally appropriate practices in the same way. You need knowledge about child development and learning, right? You need to have cultural relevance, and you need to have individually important. If those 3 things are not there, I don't care what you're doing, it's not developmentally appropriate. But often, DAP is associated with particular teaching practices, such as guided play in classrooms that have structured learning experiences like center-based instruction, things that you would see in a discovery area or a block area. Now, here's the claim that I would hear as a kindergarten teacher, right? That given that how those kind of teaching practices cannot work with the children that you're teaching, because of the severe deficit that they come behind. We talked about 18 months behind. That's been well discussed. So really, here's the question. Are developmentally appropriate practices equitable? Again, I'm definitely going to give a teacher wait time on that. Let it marinate for a little.
So I think especially with 3 and 4-year-olds, kids learn at different paces, and we talk to parents about that all the time, that especially at that age, it's more important to develop those social skills, building confidence, being self-directed, learning how to work in a team, being exposed to the different interest areas. So I think we try to emphasize that more, especially at the pre-K level, and then the fact that it's such high quality, you're going to acquire that vocabulary and things like that, that maybe there was a deficit to begin with. But, you know, in our opinion, as long as, you know, you're there, your attendance is good, and that we see progress, those students are going to be just fine.
And I think it goes back to how it's defined, right? So really taking a look at each child, that individual child, having a really good understanding of child development and learning and the cultural context. And that begins with open communication and learning from each other. And, you know, not to sound cliche, but it takes a village to raise the child. So, like Monica, coming from Trenton, you have a deep understanding of what your children are facing, what they need, and I'm sure you immerse yourself within the community in order to help guide and educate. And so I think in those particular situations, you, again, through an understanding and through a common mission and open communication where everyone is learning from each other, that those developmentally appropriate practice can meet the needs of each of our children.
actually think that as long as we don't leave the conversation or start the conversation at pre-K and we start the conversation at birth, then developmentally appropriate practices are definitely equitable. If we start at pre-K and we're missing that other piece at birth to 3, then we may start to see some challenges. And I think the reason why I say that is I was just on the soccer field with my little guy the other day. He's 3 years old. And his coach said, stand behind me. All right, now we're going to stand next to each other, stand next to so-and-so. And I thought about it. I said, we're not in the classroom. And my kid is understanding these positional words, right? He's 3 years old. But if you're not having those high-quality experiences, both inside and outside the classroom, and if you're starting and you're waiting too late to start those conversations, then it can be more difficult for other little ones who don't have those same experiences.
And that's so interesting because that's the claim then. Your little one goes to Joe's school. He has this positional vocabulary and gets what's going on, but then lots of children show up at Joe's school without that, often interpreted by folks who aren't as knowledgeable in early learning as Joe, or perhaps some teachers as, well, that's why we need to do this kind of drilling of this particular content. Joe, have you navigated that at all, or have you experienced that?
Sure, and I agree, but what we found is, again, with high quality pre-K and teachers who've been trained the right way, shortly after, but through modeling and through experience and through routines and procedures, that child that may have been lacking in that will, eventually acquire what they need to.
So obviously, I think we could have a whole panel just on this conversation and the talk of balancing content knowledge with the skills that we know that children need now and for the rest of life, and the implications of not getting that, certainly. And I think just for all of us to put a pin in that, the kind of conversation very much of the field, especially as we push up into, third grade and beyond, will it be about, that kind of balancing. One more question for this panel before I turn it over to all of you, and it kind of, builds on the last question. Do teachers and administrators in your setting have a common understanding of research-based assessment and curricular practices? If yes, what did you do to develop this perspective? If not, what could be done to develop it?
I can speak on Trenton, the preschool program, providing high-quality professional development, first and foremost, to all stakeholders, not just our teachers, but our teacher assistants. We have our motto that all individuals in the classrooms are teachers, to providing them equal training. I know there's some locations, unfortunately, that they're not able to provide the same quantity of time to the teacher assistants or paraprofessionals that they do to teachers. In Trenton, we do equal. So the directors also participate in training, but making sure whatever trainings we have, that they all are given the same opportunity and to participate. But then we also have our teachers set in levels, if that makes sense, and our assistants, because we also differentiate for our staff. So although they don't realize when they're going to training, they're differentiated. They are differentiated based upon their work that the master teachers and the supervisors and their directors see with their work in the classroom. And we have levels. We have bronze, silver, and gold. And so when trainings take place, they are assigned based upon their level for differentiation. There are some individuals that we know are on the cuff that we can move to another group. We tier them with the silver to move them to silver, because we know people by nature are competitive and learn from others the same way students do. There are some that are in the silver group that we mix in with the gold. And then it's interesting to see that they become gold teachers or teacher assistants as well. So making sure there's high quality professional development for them and follow-up is a big piece that we do in the city of Trenton.
In Newark, I think, again, this is where teacher coaches come in, and they do a wonderful job of that. I think in many districts, in terms of getting professional development for administrators and leaders, is kind of hit or miss. In Newark, our director, Samantha Lat-Velez, is here today, and what I've seen the past year under her leadership is monthly, ongoing pre-K to third grade training for administrators in Newark. And I think that's a great idea for districts to follow, because you need to have your teachers and administrators, on the same page.
How about in provider settings? What does this look like of getting administrators, teachers, directors, teachers all on the same page?
I think in East Orange, we strive to do similar things where teachers and teacher assistants and directors are provided professional training. However, it kind of just depends on who needs what at the time. So if you're starting new as a new teacher and you need training on the curriculum, but then you've already had people who've gone through training on the curriculum, then you don't necessarily need to do that. So it is very differentiated, but it works. It works, I believe.
And I think for us, I think my teachers and my teachers' assistants get a lot of support with the training. I think for myself, I can't always find the time to attend the district things because I'm running a building with other children in it. So if I could divide myself, or there could be a different way to do that, that would be helpful, because I sometimes feel I'm not as big a support as some of the master teachers are to my staff.
The dividing yourself is a different panel. Renee.
And as a professor, as I prepare these future teachers, it is about understanding how children develop and learn and how that assessment system supports their understanding of where each child is and what to do next in order to help that child progress on this continuum. However, it's also helping teachers understand how to analyze programs, because we have a lot of programs in schools and districts, especially in our kindergarten through third grades. And so it's taking those programs, analyzing them with the understanding of standards and child development to truly meet the needs of children, where it's not solely a reliance on the program.
It's interesting to highlight some of the work in the great district of Camden, where there's a part of the strategic plan and strategic direction is aligning preschool to third grade, and they chose to start with a building. I had the pleasure over the last few weeks of supporting some of that work. And Assemblywoman Mascara mentioned earlier the importance of communication. And afterwards I was talking to her that, simple and easy are not the same things, obviously, right? It's simple to talk about this idea of communication. It's not easy to get preschool to third grade teachers in a building, talk about the strategic direction, define out what it actually looks like. You're doing this assessment, wait, we're doing this assessment, how does that jive together? In what ways are we supporting whole child? And certainly commend Camden for doing that hard blocking and tackling work that needs to be done. But that's exactly, starting with that simple thing of, all right, we have to communicate why we do what we do, and then do the hard thing of really let's kind of battle it out at times of what it looks like. And I think you heard some of that certainly from this panel as well. And I know you heard lots of great things from the panel. Now we'd like to hear a little bit from you. We will have some microphones going around. We have time for a few questions if you'd like to ask of these wonderful educators that we have up here. Just throw your hand up and we'll get you a mic.
So going back to developmentally appropriate practices, I know that we discuss here from birth to 3- and 4-year-olds, but I am a principal of a K-5 school, and I am part of the Grant Nicholson Transforming Early Childhood grant. And so I have a vision already for what my K-3 should look like based on those developmentally appropriate practices. I'm thinking more like Newark Public School, because I believe you have a pre-K to 4th grade. And so it's very difficult to change teachers' mindset. Teachers who've been doing certain things for a very long time. And now we're saying, well, those are not really developmentally appropriate practices. How have you been able to get your K1, 2, and 3 teachers to implement, if you have, those practices in your school? That's very important for me.
Sure. So one great thing is we visit each other's classrooms a lot. So let's say the pre-K class has had a lot of success. there's developmentally appropriate practices that are being highlighted. How can we go observe that teacher and the interactions with the children and then replicate that in the other grades? So I'll give you an example. If there's a small group that's in the block center, and the teacher is with those children, and the teacher is asking questions about, the colors of the blocks, the sizes, how does this fit, why did you use this piece? That type of questioning could be used in third grade. Let's say a small group of students is working on a math problem, and that type of discourse is what you're looking for. Explaining how you went about solving the problem. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And then kind of getting different perspectives from the students. The same thing that's happening in the pre-K class, you're now applying to the third grade class and the other grades too. So that's very effective. And then, of course, having PLCs with the different teachers from the different grades. And if you have good relationships with your staff, a lot of times they'll start to then do that on their own, which is wonderful. So then when you see teachers visiting each other on their own, collaborating with each other, it's a wonderful thing. And so, and the toughest part is also those teachers knowing they'll have an administrator, that when that administrator walks in the room, that they actually know and value the development of the appropriate practices that are supposed to be happening.
Well, I just want to add, because the pushback is always about when they get to third grade. We're talking about content, right? Because they always think that if you are implementing developmentally appropriate practices, that you're not going to get to the content, that the content is not going to be covered or taught. And so then you have third grade teachers who are going to say, well, my kids have to take the end of SLA, and they're going to be assessed, and that's going to impact my evaluation because of everything that comes along with that, right? So what kinds of conversations you've had with your teachers to change that mindset, because that's the difference.
Sure, that you could still reach the standards that you need to, that you're still going to cover the information that needs to be covered, but it doesn't have to be where you're necessarily in a row working individually on a problem. You can still attack and solve that problem, but do it in a group where you're able to have rich conversations and discourse, and you can still accomplish what you need to.
I also think it's aligning what needs to be covered, right, based on the standards, to how it can be delivered through a variety of methodologies, right? I'm going to just touch upon an initiative that we had when I was the director of early childhood in a district, and we focused on early childhood mathematics. And our kindergarten, first, second, third grade classrooms did look a little bit different in their delivery of math, a few years ago, where children were in whole group settings for a lengthy period of time through volunteers, teacher volunteers. We talked about, using methodologies that can meet the needs of specific children, because we saw gaps in our data. And so through, again, a lot of professional learning experiences, there was a lot of attention to small group instruction, as well as center work, differentiated center work. And those teachers became teacher leaders. And then the other teachers wanted to jump on board because they saw the outcomes and they saw how child engagement was so strong in those classrooms. And it was that peer-to-peer kind of relationship that helped that initiative grow in the district, and it was a scaffolded approach. It wasn't all in 1 year.
I was going to also add that you may consider contacting the content area supervisors to ask them to identify teachers working in the upper grades that are well-skilled in that area, and possibly taking your teachers to visit so that they can actually see a peer in the district implementing it the way you would like to see them implementing it. And once sometimes they see it, they believe it's possible. And I'm sure you would be able to identify a couple of teachers that are doing it and doing it well within your own district with your own population, so they can see it actually working in its stages.
Yeah, it's important. Monica's point with Renee's, I think, is super important. There's, there's this simple question that's underlying, like, of the things that you're doing now, like, how's that working? I go to lots of states and get asked for input on legislation, in particular around reading and content areas. And the reason is because there was this strict focus on content, in particular reading, and now legislators are scratching their heads 5 years later. The outcomes aren't what they wanted them to be. What went wrong, right? So if it's not working, in some ways, that in and of itself is a good reason to do something else. So, looking at your district data to say, well, how exactly is it working? And maybe there's an impetus there to be doing something different. NAEP data that shows outcomes for African American, poor children, Hispanics is not looking great. We need to do some more rigorous teaching, especially for those populations, all children. But the data bear out later on that what we're doing now is not really working out good. So let's think about how we could do some things different. And I think that's another angle on Renee and Monica's approaches as well. Are there other questions?
Yes. Hi, I'm Annabelle Tessia from Thomas Edison State University, and I go into the classroom as a coach and mentor around culture and language. But what I find is that there's a lot of great practices, developmentally appropriate practices, but I find that in the last 5 years, I have seen the stress of teachers increase to a point where we're losing our talent. So I'm curious about what policies or what practices have you seen to really safeguard teachers' social-emotional development, because we're saying how important it is for the child, but when are we going to make that sea shift about the whole child and the whole teacher?
So you're right. We have to ask the question of who's holding our babies, right? And that's the teacher. And so one of the things that we started doing for every staff meeting, we start with a mindfulness exercise, because I recognize that it can be very stressful being in an environment with little people who may be experiencing various things and challenging behaviors and trauma. So I started off by just saying, let's start here, and then we need to grow from there.
I would hope leaders also remember that they were teachers and how tough it is, and to respect their profession. And usually when the leader sets the example, it would put teachers at ease. I don't know legislatively how that would work, but I would hope that leaders always keep that in mind.
I was going to say in Trenton, because we do have a preschool, our contracted sites, although the district is not responsible for the hiring of the directors, working and coaching with the directors on their own leadership styles, because they have many. But in addition to that, providing training opportunities. We've actually had yoga instructors come in and provide training for our teachers, teacher assistants, and directors. We've had individuals come in to do fitness things. We've done stop everything and breathe times at our various locations. So giving the directors information to take back to the schools, but also having the instructional staff take on strategies for themselves, because we need them to be healthy in order for them to help our children. So when we have our various professional development days, we do have someone that comes in, because they need to have those opportunities where they learn, whether it's yoga, breathing exercises to breathe, to relax and calm when situations do arise. Because there are situations that can make someone, if your cup is full, and then it'll overflow. It just takes that child to do one thing. So having those extra trainings to support staff, directors, teacher assistants, all staff at various locations is helpful. Even in the Office of Early Childhood, we do activities and exercises. We do a stop everything in for Healthy Mind within our own department as well. We try to do it at least once a week. Thank you.
Renee?
And it's really listening to our teachers, right? We want to listen to our children. We want to have opportunities to listen to our teachers. And weed out the stuff that's not working. sometimes we tend to layer one thing after another. So it's weeding out the things that just aren't being used, that are not working, and taking a look at the tools that we have in place that do work, and helping our educators see connections between standards, curriculum, assessment, so they can see the big picture.
Thank you. Time for one more question for the panel. So last comment, really building on that, and of course, I think even to highlight the early learning field, Anna's question is so important for a very diverse field where part of the field, the reality is, doesn't earn a living wage. That's the reality, and those are different kind of mental stressors and anxieties than public school teachers even, and beyond. Again, to make in the public school setting an example of some of the work that Camden is involved in, there are lots of things that lead to stressors in teachers' lives. One is having an uncoordinated assessment system where we don't know why we're doing these things. What exactly are we doing? They're all layered on top of each other. Ineffective stuff is not taken away. So getting more cohesive about that is a strategy to lessen the anxiety around, at least around assessment. So things like yoga and all of that could be helpful, and mindfulness very important. But so can helping teachers to understand why they're doing a particular assessment at a particular time. So there's definitely diverse strategies here. I want to thank you for your questions, for your participation today. And of course, I want to thank this panel. Please join me in a robust round of applause.